Thank you, Sister Betty. I know you can't see us, but we see you clear as crystal. I'm looking right at you.
I don't understand what's happening on this computer of mine, but anyhow, I'll be getting back, and I'm glad that you were able to see it. So let's see now. We have to acknowledge it is not, it's far from perfect. So I'm interested in watching your other guests, and I'm going to continue until I get back onto the meeting.
Okay, so whenever you're able to, please let us know, okay?
Okay, all right.
Okay, thank you, Nana, Sister Betty Dobson, co-founder of CEMOTAP. And let me reintroduce myself. My name is Raymond D. Gay, and I'm at your service. I serve as the second Assistant President General of the UNIA, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, ACL African Communities League. But more importantly, as I've already stated, I'm at your service. All I've ever wanted to do in my adult life is to serve this beautiful Black and noble race. Let me tell you how I met Dr. Wilson. I was 22 years old, attending City College of New York, Department of Chemical Engineering. This is 1984. We used to attend the First World Alliance with Sister Kefa and Brother Bill Jones. I was on the corner of 145th and Convent Avenue up in Harlem. And they were lecture series. Sister Kefa and Brother Bill had been introduced to Dr. Ben, and they just went ballistic. They fell in love with the knowledge, the purpose, the uplifting of the race. So they created a lecture series. And one spring Saturday, Dr. Wilson was speaking. And we used to, even though we lived in Queens, we used to travel, well, we attended City College, so we traveled there, and Dr. Wilson spoke. And you want to say, all I can tell you, I was mesmerized. I mean, it really hit me. And later on in the fall of 1984, my last semester at City College, he taught a class on Monday nights. It was from 6:30 to 8:30. And the problem is, I was a chemical engineering student, and we had process control lab that ended at 8:30. So on Mondays. So every Monday, I'm cutting out of my class to go listen to Dr. Wilson, and then I go back to process control. It's a laboratory, basically chemical engineering design, all of that. So I used to be so inspired and motivated. I would stay in the lab till like 11. And wow, I'm getting I hope it's not the technology. Okay, there's no echo. Good. Anyway, why am I so impressed, and why do I call Dr. AMOS Wilson the ultimate Garveyite, the mind of Garvey? Well, let's go over some of the things that Dr. Wilson embraces, and I'm going to prove to you that it's Mr. Garvey's philosophy. First of all, how do we know that Dr. Wilson is a Garveyite? Well, in my screen is his book that he wrote. I mean, it says so. Let me read it to you. African-centered consciousness versus a new world order. Garveyism in the age of globalism. I mean, Dr. Wilson freely admitted he was a Garveyite. He even said that he had written a play on Mr. Garvey. And he tells us that when he fell upon the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, when he realized it's one God, one aim, one destiny, when he fully comprehended race first, that was it. And the way I describe Dr. Wilson is this: he is the ultimate Garveyite, but more importantly, he is the mind of Marcus Garvey. Mr. Garvey writes it and states it. Dr. Wilson proves it. He gives you the backup and the proof. Okay, in one of the lectures, Dr. Wilson informs us that it wasn't just praying to Amun-Ra, it wasn't just Asar, Aset, or Heru that made Egypt, Kemet, a world, the first global economy. Said, no, it was the economy. And I was 22 years old, and I'm thinking, what is he talking about? The economy? No, I mean, I thought we just wanted to read. He broke it down and said to build, and he gave an example, to build the Great Pyramid, it took 400,000 skilled architects, craftsmen, engineers, brick masons, took 400,000 of those Africans working 6 days a week for 20 years. And then Dr. Wilson would ask us, how was this done? I mean, they need to be compensated. They needed to be paid. They needed to be fed. They needed to be housed. And then he says, you can't do that unless you have an economy. Dr. Wilson will argue that every great military power always, or not always, has to start with a great economy. This is the basis of Garveyism. Mr. Garvey clearly states that there's culture, there's economics, and there's society and politics. But the two of them cannot exist without the economics. And Mr. Garvey would tell you that it's based on an independent, self-reliant economics platform based on race first. Okay, what else does Dr. Wilson inform us? He informs us that oppression tends to make us do things that will continue oppression. It immaterializes us. It makes us childish. It makes us unintelligent. Well, guess what, brothers and sisters? This is the basis of Garveyism, that we have to uplift ourselves. We have to believe in Black people, that we have to gain, and this is how you know that Dr. Wilson is a legitimate Garveyite, because it says everything comes down to power. I mean, and let me read to you what Mr. Garvey says about power. The only protection against injustice in man is power, physical, financial, and scientific. Power is the only argument that satisfies man. And you heard Nana Betty Dobson tell us what, I have to admit, excuse me, what Dr. Wilson says about power, that our oppressors continue oppressing us because they have the power to do it, and we don't have the power to prevent it. It's simple as that. And how do you get power? Well, you've got to be organized. Organized on what? One God, one name, one destiny, and believe in race first. And one of the things that Dr. Wilson really piqued my interest was when he used the term sick Negroes. I mean, you know, here I am, I'm listening to this educated, highly intelligent African breaking down analysis, discussing consciousness, discussing neurons. And then he says, but some of our people are like sick Negroes. And when he said that, it just opened my eyes like, yeah, that makes sense. And then he explains that everybody is interested in taking care of their own children, providing, creating jobs, but not that term he uses, but that's the part of the oppression. We have to be inculcated to believe in the superiority of the master class, of the white man. So everything is geared towards that. And basically it's our reaction to that oppression. Again, Mr. Garvey clearly says the same thing. One of the basics of Dr. Wilson is what he would call group philosophy. It was in his class that he made the point that we're always being motivated to be individualized. You know, like it's my money, it's my house. And he says, no, the ruling class works as a group, that they work as a group for their power, to maintain their power. And they will promote and advertise individuality so you can fall for the bluff and continue the oppression. In fact, their strength is based on us, and Dr. Wilson clearly states this, on us being reversed in our outlook in life. He says, how else can a group less than 10% of the population dominate over 90% of the population? There's not enough arms and weapons and armaments to do that. How do you do that? You have to inculcate our people to believe in the bluff, to embrace individualism, to inculcate self-hatred. And let me tell you this is all tenets of Garveyism, all of that. And one of the big things of Dr. Wilson is where he says, we don't look at ourselves as a nation. If we looked at ourselves as a nation in terms of trade deficits, you know, we in Black communities The first thing we want to do as we progress is leave the Black communities, go into working for white communities, go into their neighborhoods. He says, if we looked at ourselves as a nation, that would be a trade deficit. It's like we're exporting everything. I mean, all of our resources, and we're not getting anything back in return. Well, the concept of Garveyism, of UNIA, is nationhood. In fact, the two tenets of Garveyism is racial uplift and the necessary corollary, self-reliance. Those two naturally intersect into nationhood. And this is, all of that is Dr. Wilson. In fact, let me say this, my first introduction to UNIA Garveyism was Dr. Wilson. I mean, I had known of the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, what the UNIA had done and all of that, but it was Dr. Wilson who tied this up. And let me add, we're also in New York in the UNIA, we formed a group called the SIA, the Students Improvement Association. If the term Improvement Association sounds familiar to you, well, that's exactly the reason. Most of us live in what we call District 29 in Southeast Queens. And on October 1, 2006, the New York Times wrote an article. The name of the article was Black Incomes Surpass Whites in Queens. In fact, of all the communities on the planet with 65,000 or more persons, Queens, and specifically being driven by Southeast Queens, is the only community of over 65,000 inhabitants that the Black incomes surpass that of whites. Well, why am I telling you that? It's because School District 29 is comprised chiefly of those communities in Southeast Queens, specifically, and as the article states, Rosedale, Cambria Heights, and Laurelton. Well, anyway, since September, we've done research into the education results, the so-called standardized state exams. What we found is not only scandalous, it's conspiratorial. I mean, you're talking the richest Black community on the planet, and the results are, I mean, in terms of what they call proficiency, overall for all of District 29 in the most recent year, which is 2019, as 2020, the exams were not administered due to COVID-19. What you have in proficiency for ELA, English Language Arts, is 37% proficiency. And in mathematics, it was 28 proficiency. Give you an idea, there was one school in District 29 in 2019, the math proficiency in the 5th grade was 6%. Brothers and sisters, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to be able to decipher that with 6% or even 27% proficiency at that stage in life, that being able to embrace higher mathematics, or being able to read and write, or being able to conduct a successful livelihood is not only limited, it's not going to happen. And in fact, the fourth grade results of what they call English Language Arts is used as a determining factor for the number of beds to project in prisons. So, brothers and sisters, what we're doing here as the part of the Students Improvement Association, I absolutely wish Dr. Wilson were alive to see this, because our philosophy with the concept and the arguments that Dr. Wilson would make about education. I mean, he clearly asked this, let me get this, as he would say, the same people that enslaved us, that benefit by oppressing us, by continue to oppressing us, and who refuse us to move into their neighborhoods, who go out of their ways to institutionalize racism. These same people are going to educate us so we can overthrow them? Not happening. It can't happen. Even if they wanted to, they can't do that. And so this is why Dr. Wilson adamantly proposes an African-centered education. So what are we doing at the Students Improvement Association? Well, the first thing we're demanding is community control of the school district. And the second thing is an immediate hire of a superintendent that from a successful background. But then we're invoking what we call the catch-up theory that obviously involves tutorial programs, Saturday after school programs, summer programs, enrichment programs. But all of this under the auspices and guise of the community. I mean, do we expect to get all of this? No, that's not the point. The point is informing our people, bringing the issues, and educated populace and will understand that this is not going to work for us. So we have to build it ourselves. So let me, and last thing I need to add about Dr. Wilson, how I timed to Mr. Garvey. Well, number one, he tells us he's a Garveyite, but you know, the concept of power, the concept of having your own education, the concept of having your own nation, this is strictly UNIA philosophy. I mean, left, right, in and out. And if you notice, the two people that Dr. Wilson he speaks on many people, but two of the people that he gives a lot of credit to is the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey and the messenger, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Well, let me inform you, the messenger was a member of the Detroit UNIA. This is on record, this is 1927. In fact, when Master Fard Muhammad becomes visible in 1930 to the messenger, to Honorable Elijah Muhammad, it's just a continuity of the same thing. And you notice both the Nation of Islam and the UNIA believe in creating their own, do for self and kind. And this is the philosophy that Dr. Wilson embraces. And the beauty of it, he tells you, you know, the concept, the purpose of education is for continuity of the species, is to make sure that we can exist, to flourish. But it's also about power. Schooling, education has to be about power. And that power necessarily means the end of our oppressor, the end of white domination. So in those terms, I could continue forever, brothers and sisters, but we realize that we have a lot of speakers and there are going to be a lot of questions and answers. And let me summarize Dr. Wilson and Mr. Garvey. Mr. Garvey says, the pen is mightier than the sword, but the tongue is mightier than them both put together. Dr. Wilson was a voracious reader, a voracious writer. Mr. Garvey, in the message to the people, he informs us we need to read at least 4 hours a day. I submit to you that Dr. Wilson had to have been reading close to 6, if not 8 hours, because the knowledge, the philosophy, the analysis, and you know, and when Mr. Garvey says the black skin is not a badge of shame, but a glorious symbol of national greatness, this ties in with Dr. Wilson, where he says we have to believe that we're not beautiful. We have to believe that we're ugly, that we're worthless. So this way the oppression continues. So in closing, when you see Dr. Amos Wilson, Honorable Dr. Amos Wilson, this is the ultimate Garveyite, the mind of Garvey. My name is Raymond Duguay, and I'm at your service. It has been my pleasure to present this to you.
CEMOTAP, Dr. Mack, I am here.
But I thank you for being on time. And we all know you're a professor at Lehman College. What department do you work in, Dr. Williams?
I'm in the
Professor Williams, excuse me.
Yes, I'm technically ABD, meaning all but dissertation, so I don't.
Yes, so that's why I said professor, I changed it.
I am in the departments, I'm currently in the departments of Africanist Studies, which is Black Studies, and English. And at first I want to say, you know, Asante Sana, thank you very much to Dr. Mack, Sister Betty, Brother Raymond Duguay, you know, for getting this together. And, you know, and I feel very honored to simply be invited into this space to talk about Dr. Amos Wilson's work. Particularly with one of my key mentors, Dr. J, Professor Jeffries, you know, here in the forum. He's the one who introduced me to Wilson. And so in a lot of ways, what I do now is directly indebted to Dr. J, among several other people. And before I start, I want to very briefly take a moment to amplify the call to contribute to WBAI radio. It is a very important organ for getting out not just Black voices, but the nationalist perspective to people in the New York City metro area, and far beyond. There are a lot of places that will put Black folk on the air, but very, very few that will put the type of perspective you can still get from WBAI out there. And I'm actually going to go a little bit further. And I would encourage people to do what I am going to do, which is not just contribute to WBAI. And I've actually already made my yearly contribution, but to make a contribution to CEMOTAP as well, because CEMOTAP as an organization, in addition to UNIA that Brother Duguay is representing, these types of organizations I see are really the cornerstone of what Baba Wilson was suggesting really needs to be how we approach this question of building Black power,
Yeah, 47.
building Black power locally and globally as part of a larger Pan-Africanist project. So, I think it's very important for us to understand that and to support these independent community-based organizations. But having said that, I want to get into my talk because I'm kind of watching the time here and kind of cognizant of what's going on. So the talk is primarily going to be based on my experience teaching Wilson's Blueprint for Black Power. And as Dr. Mack said, that is the primary textbook we use in an undergraduate class I teach in Lehman College's Africana Studies department. And the class itself is titled Fieldwork in the African American Community. So I'll talk about that in a moment, but I guess I'll talk a little bit about structure and how I'm going to approach this. So I want to talk about the politics of actually teaching Wilson and some logistical points, because I think that's important to understand in relationship to everything we're going to say today. How we use Wilson's text in the class, and an approach to reading Blueprint, and also, very practically implementing it on a grassroots level, which to me, I think is really the key. Baba Wilson did not really have in mind the idea of writing a Bible where you would parse very specifically what he meant by each phrase or, each section or each word. I think he very deliberately meant it to be what he calls it, a blueprint, meaning this is my argument for what we should do. And, I mean for you to actually take this and try to implement it in the community and see how it works. And the community is basically your lab, and that's essentially your test, like you would have in biology or an engineering class or anything else. You have the theory, and then you go into the lab and test it and see whether or not it works. And, that tells you, and that allows you to calibrate your theory. Because to Baba Wilson, the end game was not elevating himself in academia. It was essentially freeing Black people to be self-determining, independent, and having the type of strength where we wouldn't have to deal with a lot of the stuff we were dealing with. So that's my general approach to the book, but that's essentially what I want to cover here. Some practical ways of how we use it, practical ways that might help people read through it and use it themselves, and what this all means. So first, some background on the course itself. The course is basically one of the final courses students take as Africana Studies majors. And it's essentially framed around having students do work for a semester with community-based organizations and to reflect in the experience they gain in that. So in a lot of ways, it's a traditional service learning experience, but the particular approach I use is sort of an Africana Studies approach, which is to frame what they're doing in terms of Kawaida and Kwanzaa principles, particularly the idea of Ujima, which is collective work and responsibility, and the larger principle that comes from Ma'at of Saruj Ta, which is the call to service and leaving the world better than we inherited it. So the point is, and this is something that I think is, well, we actually get pushed to abandon once you get into university structures, which is to essentially uncouple what you're doing from the real world and the larger community and have it individualized. So, students are very pushed to think in individual terms, in terms of their degrees and things like that. And what I really try to push them to is essentially think about themselves as resources of the community, and that is how I try to approach where I am and what I do. I try to think of what resources does this institution that I'm connected to have that can be useful for the community, and how can I leverage whatever pull I have in there to use that, in service of the community. And I think that is one of the things Baba Wilson was calling us to do too, in terms of thinking through very much, okay, what are the resources the community has? What are the needs the community has? And then essentially having a very practical step-by-step question of how do we square those two? And understanding very clearly intellectually a lot of the structures around, such as racism, capitalism, and all the things like that, all of which Wilson has an incredible analysis of in Blueprint. But his point is not really either to say, okay, why us, or intellectualize it. His point is very much, all right, practice. So what is our plan? How can we analyze what we see and use some of those principles to actually build Black power in communities? So that's kind of the big picture of how we use it, in terms of and obviously that is a political question too. And the decision to use it was actually one of the easiest decisions I've ever made. And I won't go into detail because it wouldn't be very interesting to many people. But there's a lot that goes into what book you decide to use for a course. There are a lot of practical questions in terms of, can I get it? It's, is it going to suit the goals of the course and what we want in, what we actually want students to get out of it? And this is one of the few cases where, as soon as Lehman asked me to do it several years ago, it was instantly clear exactly what I was going to use, and it was Blueprint for Black Power. And part of the reason is, Wilson's approach to how we think about building power in communities, which is how I want students to think about their experiences working with community-based organizations, because there is very much a push toward a lot of essentially professional nonprofit type organizations. And I won't really get into the discussion of that now. And by the way, Wilson has a very good critique of that in Blueprint for Black Power too. But one of the things that kind of happens in that structure is, because they tend to be propped up by grants and that sort of thing. If you kind of understand at sort of a macro level, meaning a big picture level, the way grants, including government grants, including private philanthropy works, when you get tied up into it, a lot of the time that tends to shape your mission, which, if you understand the structure of it, is basically how that stuff is intended to work. It's a way of what they call soft power. Instead of telling you, well, we want you to do X, Y, and Z with your organization, it's structured so that to qualify for these grants, you have to be pursuing certain goals in the community. You generally have to hire certain types of people. They want to see certain outcomes. They want to see you operate, in particular ways, and all that sort of thing. And it's actually not any kind of conspiracy or anything. It's very upfront and clear when you read the grants themselves. So part of the point is to use Wilson to essentially try to help break students out of that mold too. And there's a whole critique around that also, in terms of, what are the goals of an organization, and what are the pluses and minuses of accepting money, and what does all that mean? And, Wilson is, very good. As a matter of fact, one of the strongest chapters he has in the book is the chapter where he essentially leads people through that process. And, that's actually chapter 9, which is called the policy formation process, where it's kind of framed around how the government works, how governments work on a very real, pragmatic, practical level. But it sort of goes through the role of how money works, and understanding the politics behind that too. And I won't really go further into that. Maybe we can do that in the Q&A, because I don't really have that much time. But that's actually one of the strongest chapters of the entire book. And if students or anybody reading the book, I think, reads through that chapter and comes away with some of the key takeaways in that, a lot of what you'll see will become very, 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 very clear. But to say one more word on the politics of it, and I'm glad, Baba Sababu Plata is, on the call here, because he actually saved us. Because I have had problems for years with our campus bookstore getting books by small independent Black publishers. So books from Africa World Press, books from the University of Sankore Press, which publishes Maulana Karenga's Introduction to Black Studies, Black Classic Press down in DC. All of them, for some reason the bookstore has problems, and I will put that in quotation marks, getting. Meanwhile, for some reason, they seem to have no problems getting the books for my courses listed in the English department. So, I'll leave folks to deduce what they want to about that. But I bring that up in the class too, because that kind of leads into the politics of understanding all this, and also the reason why you need your own library and need to have some of these texts, because they can decide to take stuff off the internet at any time. If you have stuff on your hard drive, your computer can crash. But if you have your library, you have the primary texts right there, as the author meant it to be presented to you. And I mean, I guess unless your house burns down, you got some other issues. But nobody can actually take that away from you. So that's kind of one of the things we go into too, in terms of their understanding of all this stuff. That, and the fact that when you buy this book, the money is going to a small Black press that is only concerned with putting out stuff that is going to help liberate Black people. And there's something there, because they actually need to be able to operate and do this work. So that's part of the discussion we have in the class too. So students, because it's very important for students to understand some of the backstory of what goes on too. But I'm going to move on here, because I'm taking a look on the time, and it's running fast pretty quickly. So in terms of using the book in the class, we generally look at between 9 and 12 chapters, depending on the particular semester. And the focus is generally on chapters dealing with ideology and politics, because it generally helps students reflect on what they're seeing as they deal with organizations in the Black community more broadly. So we try to think about the importance of ideological orientation of organizations, and how that frames how organizations work with Black communities, why organizations are important, and also Wilson's approaches to electoral politics and government, and how we see both of those as both potential sources of power, and also some of the contradictions involved in dealing with that too. So one thing I have to say up front is that Blueprint is not an easy text to read, not just because of its size, but because of how comprehensive it is, and Wilson's writing style. As a matter of fact, several years ago, one student came into the class, and I had the first day of class, I had the book sitting on on the desk, and it's a pretty imposing looking book. And students said, is that the text for the class? And I said, yeah. And the student walked out, dropped the class, never ever saw them again, which was kind of wild. Fortunately, that's the only time that's ever happened. And of course, they left before I got to explain that we're not going to read the entire thing, because it isn't an English class and it isn't a novel. You have to read it strategically, and there are some specific ways you should do it, which I'm going to go into right now, which I think are going to be hopefully more broadly helpful. So the first part we do is simply deal with how you read the text and how you read Wilson. And the first thing I can share, which is somewhat obvious, is that reading it collectively has a lot of benefits. And the second point is that it gets easier if you understand how Wilson writes and organizes arguments, which is that he generally structures individual chapters in a way that I'll call definition, description, and prescription. So definition, description, and prescription. So three general large parts to each chapter. So, chapters generally start with a definition of the particular issue that the chapter is going to cover. So how is this defined? And a lot of the time he'll use standard existing definitions from other sociologists or people who write about things and all that sort of thing. That's generally followed by a description of the background that helps you understand the issue and means to show you how the issue works in practice. And finally, at the end of just about every chapter, Wilson presents his prescription of what might be done. So the plot spoiler here, which isn't very much of a plot spoiler, is that Wilson thinks the key is building independent Black institutions, organizations, and ultimately a political party that are explicitly nationalist in focus and have the financial independence to operate autonomously and commitment to nation building. So that's kind of the upshot of all that. But like any good story, the question is, okay, well, how do we get from point A to point B? And that's kind of what Wilson walks you through in each particular chapter. So if you're willing to accept some of his definitions at face value, you can read a little bit less time using these and go into some of the other things he's presenting in the chapters. And one way people can do it is actually just jump to the end of particular chapters they want to read. Which we don't do in the class, because a lot of it is kind of teaching students to go through that entire process and read difficult texts. But if you're reading it by yourself or with a small reading group or study group, then that's one way you can ease yourself into it. You can read what his prescription is, and then you can read kind of the backstory later on. The other thing I found that works fairly well is to remember that it's not a novel, and it actually reads fairly well if you jump around and read particular chapters on their own. Now, that doesn't mean that it doesn't, to a certain extent, build somewhat sequentially, and there isn't a lot of interrelationship between chapters, but it does mean that you don't have to. I think that helps you kind of get out of the psychological hold of seeing, well, this is an 800-page book and I have to start with page 1 and read to page 800. And that's not necessarily the case. And, other general strategies which are kind of basic to reading very difficult text, things like summarizing, things like having discussions, things like individual presentations can all help you get through this book. And the good thing I'll say is that after a few weeks, just about everybody in the class tends to get it, to one extent or another, some greater than others. But after kind of going through this structured process, Wilson's words really begin to become alive. So I'm actually going to jump to my conclusion now and wrap up, because I see that I'm at the 20-minute mark. So general takeaway is a few things. One, the text is actually much more accessible than it might look at on the surface. and it will definitely pay a lot of rewards if you take the time to go through it. I encourage people to do study groups and reading groups on it, which will be very helpful in terms of what the takeaway is for building power in the Black communities. The beauty and strength of Wilson's book is that he actually does, in addition to actually giving us a blueprint, it is meant to be used on the local level. So the big questions are, how do you apply the things he presents in various chapters to, say, working with your church group, to working with your union, to your tenants association, to, to whatever you can think about, to, I don't know if they still have it, but to your bridge club. But the question is, how do you use whatever organized structures you have at your disposal to begin this process of building Black power in Black communities that can then be scaled to the global level? And I think I'm gonna wrap up there. So thank you very much for the invite. Thank you for the time. Please remember to support WBAI and CEMOTAP.
Okay, thank you, Brother Hank William. That was excellent. I was taking my notes and look forward to meeting you in person. Our next speaker is an historian. Her name is Dr. Tyrene Wright. She's the author. She is not only an author, but she's an expert on Booker T. Washington and, of course, Africa. Cast down your bucket where you are. She's a scholar, human rights activist, publisher, and local TV radio producer. I know Dr. Tyrene Wright. I call her a friend. Dr. Wright is the founder of African Women for Africa, having lived in Africa, a health literacy organization and Global Africa Press. Currently, Dr. Wright is a host for Community Action Roundtable, a New York Tri-State Area Community Affairs program on MNN. Dr. Wright teaches African and African American history for the Center for Ethnic Studies at the City University of New York. It is my pleasure to introduce the first world expert on Booker T. Washington, Dr. Tyrene Wright. Go right ahead.
Thank you very much. I noticed that's an old bio, so that's really nice, but it's complete. Let me just say this. I'm still in the City University of New York, but I'm at New York City College of Technology, not BMCC any longer. So thank you, Mr. Duguay, for that wonderful introduction. I am a historian, and thank you for acknowledging that and the work, my contribution to Pan-Africanism and Booker T. Washington, reclaiming him. Sister Betty, thank you for the invitation. Dr. Mack, thank you for the invitation, inviting me to speak today. And this topic, this discussion, this mini conference around Amos Wilson is so important because all of these things that he discusses in Blueprint for Black Power and his other texts are key in understanding some of the psychology or the impact of what I call psychological warfare that is been imposed on African people. But also it gives us another understanding of how ideology works. And so I'm going to begin my presentation with hitting on just a few points that I think in the 21st century, because this is what it's all about, how Dr. Amos Wilson's work can be taken into and how it's still with us in the 21st century as lessons, as prescription, as instruction. And so I want to lay down just a few concepts to begin with and to get started with my presentation. I'm actually going to focus primarily on those issues that I think impact us right now around the psychological warfare, one would say, or the psychological impact of white supremacy in culture as an ideology, and how Dr. Wilson deals with this in the historical context, how he addresses this in the historical context, why history is important, but also what it produces in terms of practices, ideologies, whether we are aware of it or not, around individualism. And then I'm going to wrap up with just a little critique around what he posits in terms of sanity or insanity and the model of sanity under white supremacy and culture. And so that will end my presentation, and I'll probably say a couple of words about history, psychology, and ideology. But first off, so Brother Raymond, you did something that I'm going to follow suit in. I'm going to interplay some of the concepts with Amos Wilson that are present in Amos Wilson's work with concepts that are existing in our culture, in our struggle for liberation, and invoke one of our ancestors known as Kwame Ture, aka Stokely Carmichael. You know, some people don't remember that Stokely Carmichael was one of those people who made great contributions to the civil rights movement, even though he wasn't a proponent of civil rights, right? He did more organizing to get Black people voting in the United States, although he was a staunch Black nationalist, right? And ultimately would go on to establish an organization called the All African People Revolutionary Party, which went beyond the borders of the US in its scope and agenda. But that being said, something that I have a quote that is often misused that I want to start out with in terms of ideology. That quote is a quote that was initiated during a lecture by Kwame Ture. And it is, the role of the conscious is not to make the unconscious conscious. And those of you who have seen this lecture may know, yes, life happens. The role of the conscious is to make the unconscious conscious of their unconscious behavior, right? I'll say it again, because so many people try this and don't get it right. If you watch the whole lecture, he settles on this one statement. The job of the conscious is not to make the unconscious conscious, right? Make them think like you. The role of the conscious is to make the unconscious conscious of their unconscious behavior. The things they already say and do, engage in, participate in, initiate, right? It is behavior most often we engage in unconsciously, meaning we do not think about why we're doing it. We do not think about who is benefiting or who is not benefiting. We're not thinking about whose culture that behavior or action originates with or from, right? We're not thinking about whose agenda it advances. And so that paradigm I want to set forth so that we can have a better understanding of what I'm going to speak on in terms of Dr. Amos Wilson's work. Ideology, just another working definition here. Ideology, we use it. A lot of people use the term ideology all the time, but have no understanding what ideology is. Ideology is theory coupled with practice. Theory coupled with practice. That's ideology. You think if you get up and walk to the kitchen, you will ultimately get something to eat. That's a theory. Then you engage in the practice. And understanding that We know that there's very little that people engage in that is devoid of ideology. There's a whole lot that people engage in that is devoid of consciousness. And the requirement for the host of white supremacy and culture is unconsciousness. Masses of our people are in unconsciousness. They only know they do what they're supposed to do because they were told, or this is the pattern set forth by others for them. Therefore, most of our behavior is categorized as unconscious behavior. Okay? Amos Wilson is very clear on this. However, that concept in the neatest and most succinct way is embodied in that quote by Kwame Ture, right? The role of the conscious is not to make the conscious conscious, but is to make the unconscious conscious, but to make the unconscious conscious, aware of their unconscious behavior. Why are you doing that? Why are you saying that? Who does that benefit? So on and so forth. And so those are the two ideas I want to set forth first before engaging in this talk about Amos Wilson's work, which I'm not going to focus on Blueprint for Black Power because it is just, the scope is so broad for this amount of time. But I am going to just hit a couple of points from the falsification of African consciousness, Eurocentric history, psychiatry, and the politics of white supremacy, which I'm sure many of you have. So the other book, Raymond Duguay held up the other book. I'm holding up this book, the one on Garveyism he had, and I have all of them, but I'm going to take my points from here. And first and foremost, we want to talk about history. Amos Wilson
Dr. Wright, please unmute yourself.
Okay, is that better? I don't know how that happened.
No, I had to mute everyone because there was background noise.
Oh, okay, no problem. Thank you very much. Amos Wilson, so I don't know what you missed, but most of what I'm critiquing here is coming from the falsification of African consciousness, Eurocentric history, psychiatry, and the politics of white supremacy by Amos Wilson. Amos Wilson is very clear on the importance and the study of history. I'm going to cite briefly from his work in order to lay out a little understanding of what I'm going to discuss. He takes the point of why study history at the opening of the book, and he says, the study of history cannot be a mere celebration of those who struggled on our behalf. We must be instructed by history and should transform history into concrete reality, into planning and development, into the construction of power and the ability to ensure our survival as people. If not, Black History Month becomes an exercise in the inflation of egos. I love that. It becomes an exercise that cuts further off from reality. Ironically, we now see even other people who are not our friends joining us in this celebration, which means that they must see in it some means of protecting their own interests and see in it something that works for them and possibly against us. Does that sound familiar about Juneteenth? Okay, so the role of history, right? all the new Juneteenth celebrators and participants, right? The point of history is to understand the movement of power over time. History allows us to sort of go up here and assess how power moves through spaces, through people over time. This is part of the reason why history can be seen as a dangerous occupation in studying that. It tells us who has power, what they did with their power, who lacks power, how they fought for power, how they wrestled power away, and how they also use their power. That's what history does, okay? It allows us over time to make those assessments. And what Amos Wilson is saying is that we are discombobulated from a historical perspective, particularly within the confines of the United States. In a next section of the book on this subject of history, he also uses the context of Reconstruction to exhibit this. What he says is that the term in and of itself is a misnomer, reconstructing. Reconstructing what precisely? Okay, Reconstruction, there had never been a construction of the African person's life and all that comes with it in America at that point, right? So now what are you reconstructing? Are you reconstructing the South? Are you reconstructing the United States? And so he makes that point that our view of history, as it has been taught to us by the oppressive class, is that you finally reached your paradise during the 1960s. You finally, where you assimilated, where you integrated, right? Where you gave up what you had in your communities, which was the only thing you had. And, you know, I could go on a tangent on another lecture about the nature of our communities, independent African nations, independent African communities within the United States that was sustainable. Black Wall Street wasn't the only one. It wasn't the first one. I don't know if it was going to be the last one, but the point is that there were many. And so historically, just to make the point quickly, one of my ways that I lecture around this particular subject is that no, the high point of the African struggle for liberation in the United States is not the 60s, the civil rights movement, or even really, I hate to say, or the Black Power movement, even though the Black Power movement transforms the thinking of African people, Black people within the United States, right? We transform Blackness as a negative to a positive. So that was internal work. But in terms of the larger narrative in history in America, the narrative plays out much like you were in slavery, we freed you, and then in the 60s, you began to integrate, simulate, and have some measure of social freedom in American society. And that is the high point. Positioning integration and assimilation, not only of our bodies and our monies, but of our minds. There's a sociological concept that says social assimilation leads to suicide. And for African people in America, social assimilation has led to suicide, both literally and figuratively, right? We have some rising numbers in suicide in the Black community of people who have historically, as Africans culturally, had a suicide taboo. But our social assimilation into their society has allowed us to also suffer that level of mental illness where suicide is a possibility. But more importantly, on a social level and political level, social assimilation means suicide because in order to assimilate in the dominant culture, one must kill their own culture. In order to assimilate into the dominant culture, the oppressive classes culture, white supremacy and culture, one must kill their own African culture. Values, principles, way of life, right, is what culture is. And so in the narrative around history in the United States, that has always been viewed as the high point, the civil rights movement. However, there is another way to look at history in this country in particular, and that is that the highest point for African people in the United States was Reconstruction. Under Reconstruction, African people were able to establish their own communities. 2,000 people in local, state, and federal levels of government. representing the people, sustainable Black communities. Part of people think I've done a whole bunch of work around Booker T. Washington. I've done some specific talk about Tuskegee and what Washington did as a sustainable model for African people. And it was one of those independent Black communities that masqueraded as a school. So we had many of those. The truth of the matter is that posed such a threat that Reconstruction was reversed. And we are living in the promise and the backlash of white supremacy that says that will never happen again. We are looking at history and the historical picture completely wrong. Our high point was between 1865 and 1877. And there's a trickle over to the turn of the century, but it is responded to by white pathology. And the highest expression of white pathology has been through violence. And so to solve the problem of rising sustainable Black communities out here in the Western Hemisphere and this place called America, they engaged in unbridled violence, which if we understand, and Amos Wilson talks about this, we have to put the European in a historical context, because if we understand their culture, we understand that the only response for them would have been the response that they know, which is systematic violence. It's just a fact. None of us, human beings, do not live outside of culture. A friend of mine, and I have to invoke him, his name is Johanse Bediako. He says, no human beings have lived outside the context of culture. The first human beings were born and come from Africa. Therefore, for most of the time that we have been on this earth, to be human, what it means to be human means to be African. And how we live, the first culture is African culture. Well, Europeans have a different cultural construct and context. And if you, I don't have time to go into it, but what they have produced out of their 1,000+ years prior to their arrival in the Americas, they have produced a culture that is fundamentally anti-human. It's not about right or wrong. It's not about good or bad. It's not about Black or white. It's about they have produced a culture that is distinctively anti-human, not only to themselves, because they practice all of this stuff on themselves first, but on the rest of the world, right? And so just to bring it back home, the problem with not having an assessment of history doesn't allow us to see where we are in our development as we struggle against white supremacy and culture. It also leaves us powerless in a game where an assessment of power is necessary. And so I'm going to move on really for the purpose of time and get on to the other points I want to make. Individualism. Out of this distinctively anti-human culture, we have this issue of individualism. The African person, and I must explain this succinctly, we are the agriculturalists on this earth. It is us. You know, I know in South Africa, they talk about what's going to happen when the white farmers aren't there. We'll know what to do because we have been the agriculturalists on this earth from the beginning of time. Agriculturalists produce a certain culture, live a certain way. And that being said, there is one principle about agriculturalists that is lacking in the European context. The basic concept for agriculturalists is that you cannot have too much land or too many children. Why? To work the land. The production of people contributes to the development of the collective community and nation. The more people you produce, the more land you can work, the more you can grow, and so on and so forth. That is a worldview that comes out of the agriculturalist reality. But the European, in a cold, hostile environment, has a different view around producing people. right? The more people you have, the more mouths you feed. This school, this idea that you hear often now that has seeped out into the world from their culture is the survival of the fittest. It's you or I, it's me or you. Well, that's coming from a European worldview, simply because scarcity was a reality for Europeans, as abundance in many levels, particularly for the agriculturalists, is a reality for African people and people on the equator, right? But we're going to stick with Africa. Individualism and self-blame. Individualism is born out of the European worldview. The African knows that the people have done more for him or her than he or she will ever do for him or herself. Let me say it again. The people have done more for you than you will ever do for yourself. So we are born into a community, a culture with norms, with values, with principles. And in this particular African context, the reality is that there is safety, there is security, and there's prosperity in numbers. The European worldview views additional human beings as a threat. Why? Because you can neither sustain and or feed the people you produce, right? In their context. So Amos Wilson seeks to critique the idea of individualism and self-blame as it makes its way over to us as people who have European culture and psychology, and I would assert pathology, imposed on us. One of the ideologies, and I'm quoting, one of the ideologies, there are a number of them, but I will look at just this one today, projected to maintain European dominance is the ideology of individualism. We hear a great deal today of the do your own thing and I do mine of the kind of situation. The so-called individualization of success and failure. That is where individual failures are seen as the result of what we call personal ineptness or behavior as a sign of moral inferiority. That is, those people and individuals who fail in society fail as a result of problems within themselves, some individuals' shortcomings or ineptness, ultimately failing as a result of some moral problem within their personalities. This is imposed on the African person, meaning that in a capitalist system, we deem the poor in particular as wretched, deserving of their poverty, wrong in some way, inherently bad, right? Lazy, shiftless. These are all pathologies imposed on us by Western culture. Individualism makes all of that rest on the individual, right? Individualism says, only I determine my own outcomes in this world. I'm not attached to anyone else. The other, and which is a Eurocentric point of view, the other worldview says, I am the people, right? The people have done for me more than I will ever do for myself in my own lifetime. We are inherently tied to the welfare and the well-being of the people. And so in the African context, this is a perfect example of how social assimilation has led to suicide. There is a killing of that culture, right? That says we are connected to each other. Whereas here, the individualism is the supreme religion almost, and everyone only serves their individual interests. How many times do we hear people say, oh, well, you know, I would never do that, but you know, I had to make that money. Right. So who are you? Right? Meaning you would not otherwise do this if you were not pressured in the context of capitalism. You have separated from your true values, beliefs, principles, and practices in order to satisfy the situation, the larger context of a capitalist society. And so what Amos Wilson is talking about is that a trading off of cultures. Individualism is succinctly put in Eurocentric or Western culture. Communalism, collectivism, some people may say even aspects of socialism are part of African culture, where we come together to contribute to the betterment of us all, right? Our numbers are our power. Our unity is our security, okay? And so he critiques that because this leads to forms of pathology, or I'll say in his terms, insanity for the African person living in and living outside of their own culture, right? Neely Fuller talks about this thoroughly, how none of us act, do, speak, live in the way that we would had we not encountered white supremacy and culture, right? So nothing is normal, right? And he says, if you do not understand racism, white supremacy, what it is and how it works, everything you think you understand will only confuse you. So I'm gonna, because I was told I had 2 more minutes, history and psychology and ideology. We look at the history of European imperialists, we see their psychology. As I have said on numerous occasions, the psychology of the rulers of this world, the psychology of the Eurocentrically oriented people is not in the psychology books, but the history books. And one merely needs then to read their history to get their psychology. My point about the culture, the cultural context, the history of Europeans, and then understanding with European insanity, which I frequently call pathology, is playing out through our people, right? In a form of isms, many different isms, okay? And that history, of course, is not written by me, not written by Black scholars. It is not written by us, prejudiced nationalists. It is written, of course, by the imperialists and themselves, and therefore is a form of self-indictment, and it is there for all to see. It is an admission in and of itself of the insane nature of the people who are in control of the world today. And I'll just close with this simple idea. We hear this term constantly today, just to root it in our contemporary dilemma. We hear this term privilege, white privilege, and I would posit in light of the work of Amos Wilson that it is not privilege. It is a collective pathology that they are involved in, okay? It is a collective pathology. I'm writing an article now, so we'll see where it goes or where I publish it. But the point is, it's not privilege. It is pathology. Now, our choices as African people are to move about the world and engage each other consciously or unconsciously, knowing when white pathology is playing out through us. Okay? And how you do that prescription, at least, at every point, one should ask themselves what I am doing, why I am doing it, and whom I am doing it for. And I'm going to leave it. Well, I'll give you one example. I'm a Tuskegee alumni. Everybody knows that. When we had history was required for everybody. When we had history class, our professor, History 101 at a historically Black college, the question to the class for the brilliant aerospace engineer majors who also were required to take history was this: Mr. Hotshot aerospace engineer or electrical engineer, you going to build a plane? And they would all answer, yes, they're going to build a plane. And ultimately our professor would say, who are you going to build that plane for? Who will you build that plane for? Will you build the plane for them or for the African nation? So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Dr. Wright. Dr. Wright, thank you so much. I know it's hard to squeeze in. Everybody, please give her a black hand. That was wonderful. It's hard to squeeze what you have to do. in a small amount of time. Sometimes you get to feel hopeless. You say, is the work of Amos Wilson going to continue? Is the work of all these greats, Dr. Ben, going to continue? Is the work of Dr. Clark going to continue? And then you look around and all of a sudden there's a young person that's answering the call. One of these is a young psychologist, Dr. Cartman. He's operating out of Chicago. That's all the introduction I'm going to give for him right now. Dr. Cartman, the floor is yours.
Appreciate you, Dr. Mack. Appreciate
Yeah,
you,
don't hurt
family.
yourself. Appreciate you too, good luck.
I'm honored to be invited to share among such an esteemed gathering of Black folks. Before I begin, I'd like to ask the permission of my elders to do this presentation. Ashe, appreciate you, Baba. And so, I mean, as he introduced me, I consider myself the next generation of this work. I accept the challenge, the call to bring to life the blueprint. To Baba laid a groundwork. He gave us instructions, and it's my obligation to follow through. So my work represents that. And I always say, I got a Ph.D. in white psychology. Even at a Black school, which is a challenge. I went to Hampton University, still learning about Freud, Skinner, and Watson. Still learning about Adler, right? So it wasn't until I bumped into a professor named he wrote scholar. His name's blanking on me right now. Reginald Jones, Dr. Reginald Jones at Hampton University. He introduced me to the scholarship of the Black psychologists, the Amos Wilsons, the Wade Nobles, the Naeem Akbar, Linda James Myers. And that became my African orientation, that my foundation was set from there and on out. So then I could go through the rest of the master's, PhD, learning other people's stuff, but knowing that my work was going to be represented by the Amos Wilsons and the like. And so I wanted to share what that looks like for me here in Chicago and other places I do this work at. So I wanted to share my screen and do some visuals to really give you a description, a presentation, a visual representation of what it looks like to take Amos Wilson's work from the page to life. So that's what I attempt to do every day in my work. Can I get a co-host or, oh no, I got it. I got screen share. So what I'm gonna do here is, and it was really exciting to go back and put this presentation together because, when you do the work for, what I'm saying, when you get influenced by these scholars, it's hard to actually say like what exactly the influence was. It's more like all of it becomes a part of you. It becomes like the salt in the stew. It's just in there. And so it was really powerful to be able to come back, go back through some of his books, go back to some of his articles and works, and pick out those things that were influential in setting up the tone for my work. So I want to do that today. I wanted to go back and share some excerpts of books, of articles, of pieces of Amos Wilson's ideology and instruction and blueprint that I'm attempting to build upon, and invite the community to critique, to give feedback, to help shape it. I never got to meet Baba Amos. I only met him through videos and through his words. And it was, the power of documentation and storytelling. It was really about the cultural transmission. And so I'm honored to be, in the room with folks that knew him, that were friends of his, and that got to see him speak. So I welcome your feedback and your additions to continue to build as I am. The power of Amos Wilson for me was really the fundamental shift in worldview, and really taking everything that I knew and learned from school, turning it on its head, being able to investigate the power of words at their core, and the connection between words and consciousness and identity and behavior at every step of the way. So every moment of my life, every time I read, every time I'm watching TV, every time I'm in lectures, because of Amos Wilson's sort of direction, I'm constantly critically thinking and evaluating and looking at the framework from an African power position. And he sets this tone here, talking about the power of words. Words not mere means of communication. Words have histories. They represent political experiences. They represent political, military, and economic intentions. And so because of that, all of the words have power in framing our worldview. Right now, if I say, what is today? Everybody will say today's Saturday. That word Saturday has a historical context. It comes from the mythologies, the ideologies of the Greeks and the Romans. This is specifically a Roman god named Saturn. When I looked at the pictures, I'm like, what's this dude eating the babies for? I had to find out what the Saturn thing was about that I invoke every time I say the word Saturday. without even consciously thinking about the energies that I invite into my life, my time and space. I can't look into the sky without thinking about the European framework. I can't think about the names of the streets. I live on Jefferson Street. My last name still is a badge of dishonor for the enemy of my people. Every word, every name, everything that frames my worldview, my place, my day, my time has been inculcated by this European domination, including the name of today's Saturday, this Roman god that had been foretold that one of his sons would overthrow him. So he had to eat his children every time they were born. That's what I invoke when I say Saturday. Amos Wilson has me challenging that, has me being aware of that and the influence of that word on my consciousness, but not just that word, but all of the words. And what he tells me is that under oppression, like we are, that everything must be turned on its head. In a system, in order for us to be ruled, we have to be ruled in terms of the consciousness, the lies and the deceptions. And so I, as a liberator and as a African trying to protect myself from that domination, have to flip everything on its head. So when I hear classical music, I've been trained, I've been programmed to think of certain images, right? I hear violins, I hear a cello, I see the timpani, because what their classical music is has been shaped by the worldview that they have inculcated me into. But the truth is, and we all know this on this class, but we have the classic music. The drums, that the art orchestra is what really classic is. When I think primitive, I've been trained to think that means backwards and less than and pagan. But when we understand the first civilizations, we understand the majesty and the elegance and the power of those things. Here in Chicago, anytime they say high crime neighborhood, and these are materials I bring to young people, right? We in the hood, we in Inglewood, we in Austin, and they say you in a high crime neighborhood, and I say, are you? Like where does the crime located in the city that damages ecosystems, that creates the conditions for the poverty and the trauma that you experience, right? We got gun violence, man to man, woman to woman sometimes, but like, where did these guns come from? Who created these neighborhoods? It's the folk in downtown Chicago. Chicago is one of the most corrupt political cities in the country. We got, governors that, been in prison. So I can call attention to the crime that happened economically, structurally, and point to what a gang violence looks like in a different way once I have a new orientation based on Amos Wilson's work. I got to flip everything on its head in a system of oppression. Every word, every label has power and meaning, and it influences my consciousness. What it means to be standard, have professional, good hair, scholar, all of these words come with a certain power that has minimized the ability for African people to strategize, to free ourselves, and it has everything to do with the psychological warfare that Doc was speaking to a second ago. And in my field, in psychology, Amos Wilson gave me the power to free myself from the confines of this machinery, this imperial establishment that use its definitions of diagnosis, of labeling, of treatment to allow us to, at our best practice, to cope with this sick system. At our best in psychology, the best we can do is manage, not heal intergenerational trauma, not build power, not, it's a very feel good kind of a feel. Like if I want to say I did good and pat myself in the back as a therapist, if somebody came into my office, they had anger issues and I resolved them, I got them to deep breathe and to feel more calm, then I did good as a therapist. But sometimes we need to hold that anger. If you ain't angry right now, you ain't paying attention. If you're not sad, you ain't paying attention. So some of this, my role as a therapist should not be to make people feel better, but to have more power. And I got that from Amos Wilson. The successful treatment of an African person in oppression and warfare is not always soft, right? And sometimes we have to be tender, we have to flow like water. Sometimes we have to reduce stress. We can't be fighting all the time. And at the same time, it's not just about feeling better, because that's a subjective understanding. And in a world where we are under attack, the things that we find fun, the things that we find entertainment from are often those things that are also propping the system up of white domination and pathology. But we gotta look at that at every step of the way. And so the difficulty is not just understanding that, not just reading Amos Wilson and getting that myself, but being able to transfer that conversation to young people. So I spend a lot of time looking through hip hop, looking through art, looking through culture to find ways to have this conversation so that I can explain to them what Amos Wilson helped me understand in a language that they can get. So this is an example of a song that I found that helps me go into a neighborhood where an African person, a young man, a young woman has this sense that they are broken, that they are deficient. I get called to go into prisons a lot and juvenile detention centers. They want me to come in there as a psychologist to find individual diagnosis to say that you are sick and that I need to help you make better decisions. And I always challenge that. Like I would do the reverse of that. I go in and I say, no, the whole place is sick. This institution is broken. It's designed to attack you, to quell your spirit, your rebellion. And it has implications for the generations that are coming for the next 10 generations behind you, right? I come in diagnosing the system is sick, and it's one of the songs that I help use to make that argument.
If you don't deal with your emotions, one day your emotions go deal with you. These blocks, these streets were not designed for you to prosper. They were created to house the residue of destruction that was instilled to break down your family and keep it broken. Why? So they can keep you hurt, keep you confused, keep you looking at dead ends, hanging on no hope, so they can control you, move you like livestock, like cattle, keep you isolated, keep you beaten down mentally, so they can use your light, your energy, your mind for their gain, their wealth. You got it all after that. Their profit. That's why the whole hood suffer from depression. Way before Trump won the election, the whole hood suffered from depression. I never take my blessing as a blessing, because the whole hood suffered from depression. My opposition just made an investment. Make sure the whole hood suffer from depression. Never take my lesson as a lesson, because the whole hood suffer from depression. Whole hood folding under pressure. Baby mama and my mama stressing. EBT don't come on until the 7th. Man, my whole hood suffering from depression. I often talk about trying to make it out, but really though, I ain't trying to leave. Just made a couple G's in the streets, then I spend it with some people who don't even like me. That's depression. Cause low key, I'm trying to impress them. Keep the cameras out when I get the flexing. I don't listen to the music for a message. I blow at any motherfucker that's been talking reckless. She was younger when she was molested. I say she was younger when she was his next. Now she going around screaming, hoe is life. She don't know she suffer from depression. Taking trips, but all I know is the block. Screaming fuck 12, but all I know is the cops. And I ain't grow up with my pops. Man, said that be on my mind a lot. Way before Trump won the election, the whole hood suffered from depression. I never take my blessing as a blessing, because the whole hood suffer from depression. My opposition just made an investment. Make sure the whole hood suffer from depression. Never take my lesson as a lesson, because the whole hood suffer from depression. If you don't...
We spent a lot of time on that line. Your opposition just made an investment. What does that mean? To have opposition, to have systemic opposition, and what is the investments that they're making? How are they profiting off of the pain of all the things that you're describing? Right, that's a conversation that we don't normally have as psychologists. And without that conversation, the young people are in the city feeling like my grandmama just broken, my grandpapa, there must be something wrong with me as a Black person, because all I see is pain and trauma and chaos. We gotta paint this picture, explain what system analysis looks like, and have that be connected to therapy and the treatment of the individual things that manifested from that. One of the things that I use often is history as a reorientation, a medicinal tool, right? As a psychologist, you know, the tools that they give me are talking through and helping to understand and develop insight. But Amos Wilson gave me the blueprint to understand the power of the storytelling beyond your personal history and thinking about the collective history and the way that the history as an instrument of power can help us define ourselves with truer perspective. And not even like, you know, myth making, really just telling the truth. This is one of the tools I use often in groups of young people. a timeline map that I got from Anthony Browder's website that shows the beginning of African history, 5,000 years before BC. And this is a timeline I use often, and I consider it therapy, right? I consider it treatment. I consider it the restoration of the African mind, just to put ourselves in proper perspective. In the school still, wherever I go, we still start Black History Month at slavery. We still beginning the history of the shame, of the trauma, and still telling that story in a way that does not really do it justice, but by telling the truth. And so when I can get young people to say, we can do anything, and it's not like some graduation speech, it's not some hopeful, idealistic, inspiration. It's based on the fact that we've already done it before, and I can point that out by looking at the timeline of history of the power of African civilizations, and show the beginning of European thought. So when to reverse this idea that they are the pinnacle, they are the standard, they are the classic, they are the height of thought, I can show they weren't even on the planet, certainly not thinking and reading and producing anything of value until thousands of years. Like I can say it, but like to make this point using these kind of graphs, these kind of tools is really the embodiment of how I consider what Amos Wilson was directing us to do, to reorient, to re-Africanize ourselves in proper context. He also talked a lot about the shame of the distortion of the story of enslavement for us. What he says is, with those of us that are made ashamed of our history of enslavement, by presenting African history to make us think that prior to slavery, we were essentially culturally invisible and savage and only achieved visibility and civility when the European came on the scene. And so I hear a lot of that, like people want to see no more slave movies, and I get that because we tell that story in a way that's so reinforcing of the power of the European. And without thinking about it, we want to honor the sacrifices of our ancestors, and we do that, and we do so by undermining the power of us at the same time. And so, anytime I talk about slavery, I never show the pictures of being lynched, and I would never go to that monument, the museum in Alabama. I would never take my children to this place to show defeat. If I talk about it, I'm gonna say they attacked us, but we fought back every step of the way. And I can make this an international conversation, a Pan-African conversation. At every step of the way, African people resisted. This is a chart that I use often that showed insurrections from 1526 to 1864. And I show page by page the different places in the United States, just in the United States, where people were escaping, destroying property, establishing Black states. We'll never know these names. We might hear, Nat Turner, Harry Tubman, maybe, but this was hundreds and thousands of African people that we got to tell about, to reinforce the power and the healing power of that history so that we don't have any shame about that. And to tell that story and the diversity of the ways that resistance looked like, it wasn't just fighting all the time. Sometimes it was using ingenuity, hiding messages in quilts and hair, hiding messages and poisoning the food. Like we got this house slave distinction, but every point, everywhere we were, African people fought back. I can tell that story and have young people be like, man, I want to know more about that, and not feel ashamed about that, and be connected to something bigger than themselves, to have a power and an inspiration beyond the way that we typically tell these stories. So these are some of the points. These are some of the slides that I use with young people to show them. This is a video of women warriors. I like to challenge a lot of the young generation's notion that this dear racism, I'm not my grandparents, sincerely these hands. They're trying to paint this picture that the previous generation was weak, and right now we strong, we out here fighting and we protesting. But even those that believed in nonviolence took a lot of courage. This is images of them preparing themselves to be on the front line of the war wars and blowing smoke in each other's faces and preparing to be called, assaulted. There was nothing weak about that. So we were always powerful. And even at that time when there was nonviolence resistance, there was always a diversity of ways that we were fighting. So this historiography, this telling of the story, as a psychologist, is important to me to reconstruct our minds, our place in history, and the power that we have, the capacity to fight now, because that's the kind of people we come from. Further than that, I also spend a lot of time in integrating culture into the therapeutic space. This is Amos Wilson saying that culture and tradition are intellectual tools. When we rediscover our culture and tradition, when African culture and tradition become a part of us, we're going to have an intellectual explosion such as this world has never before witnessed. Right? When we rediscover ourselves, our creativity is released. He's arguing that the European likes to reinforce this idea that our culture is just to entertain them, or to be used by corporations to reinforce these negative aspects, these self-medicating and the drugs, alcohol, and the violence is what we see from corporate hip hop. But we as African people know that our drums, our culture, our oral traditions have always been used for power, for healing. So I try to incorporate that back into the therapeutic space, particularly with men. This is an excerpt from one of the books where he's talking about manhood being a product, that we have to create it and develop it. That in every society, you have to find males at some point taken out for special treatment to have conversations amongst ourselves about what manhood means to us, aside from the toxicities that are given to us in the
Matrix,
society.
listen.
So this is one demonstration of the work we're doing
Thank
here in
you.
Chicago. It's a news clip from about a month or so ago of us doing this cultural revitalization based on some of, again, the blueprint that Amos Wilson
What is
gave
he doing?
to reorient ourselves as African people, have that be the definitions of how we diagnose, understand, and treat ourselves using our culture, using our ingenuity as warriors.
All right,
This is
thank you.
a final demonstration of the work in a way that I conceptualized the manifestation of the call that Amos Wilson left with me.
Our speaker is Dr. Oya Adowa Ma'at, and she's an electrical engineer. She's on the faculty at Morgan State, and she has studied Amos more than you would expect a person in electrical engineering to study, for sure, by forming like a study group and really going deeply into Blueprint for Black Power. So at this point, without any further delay, she's taken away from family time to be here with us. Please welcome Dr. Oya Adowa Ma'at. The floor is yours, my sister.
Well, first and foremost, I just want to say greetings to everyone on the panel. I see a lot of esteemed brothers and sisters on the panel, and so I just want to say greetings, and it's just an honor to be amongst you. I thank you so much, brother James McIntosh, for just inviting me to be on this, to participate in this conference and to speak about Dr. Amos Wilson, his legacy, and his impact, his thoughts, his ideas. And so I'm going to share my screen with you all. And also, I want to thank everyone who's listening. I know there were a few folks who inboxed me earlier today, and they were asking me what time I was coming on, and I told them around 4 o'clock. So a few of them may be logging back on, but I would like to thank those folks who are here on my behalf. And so I'm trying to, okay, here we go. All right, so Dr. Amos Wilson's 20th Century Psychology in 2021. Again, my name is Dr. Oya Ma'at. I don't know why my contact information isn't coming up, but I'm going to keep on keeping on. Oh, here it is. It's showing up when I don't put it in present mode. But if anyone would like to contact me after this presentation, my office number is on the screen, as well as my email address. And also you can find me on all social media platforms, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook under Dr. Oya Adowa Ma'at. All right. So as Brother James McIntosh, Dr. James McIntosh already stated, I am a professor of engineering at Morgan State University. I'm also the co-founder of the Gen Cyber FACS program, Females of Cyber Stars, which is hosted by Morgan State University. We're actually the first all African-American female cybersecurity camp. And so we kicked it off or launched it this summer. I'm also the host of Truth to Power Talk. It's a platform that I've been building on YouTube. I bring in a lot of our esteemed historians and scientists, engineers, even politicians come on, all sorts of folks come on, and we talk about different topics. And so if you're interested in checking out some of those discussions, please head on over to YouTube and just type in Dr. Ma'at, and these YouTube discussions will pop up. I'm also the co-founder and vice president of Ed Anime Productions, which is a company that creates educational animations and books for children that teach children about our history, our culture, and our accomplishments through our lenses. And so this presentation is dedicated to Dr. Amos Wilson. I came across Dr. Amos Wilson's work several years ago. And I must say that when I heard him speak, when I listened to his thoughts and his ideas, I mean, I almost was mesmerized by Dr. Amos Wilson. I wanted to watch every video, every lecture that I can find on him. I watched them all for the most part. And then I began to dive into his books. I've read most of them, and as Dr. McIntosh stated, I led a study group. We read Blueprint for Black Power. We went through it for about 8 months, and those discussions are on YouTube as well. But we actually studied a lot of his work, Blueprint for Black Power. I always tell folks that that is my Bible. Dr. Amos Wilson, in my opinion, is one of the greatest minds of the 20th century. I feel like I could argue that. People always say, I don't know, Dr. Ma'at. I said, I would argue them down, that I vehemently believe that Dr. Amos Wilson is one of the greatest minds of the 20th century. And so I dedicate this presentation to him. In my opinion, Dr. Amos Wilson carried the baton for Marcus Garvey, for the Honorable Marcus Garvey. If you study the work of Marcus Garvey and study the work of Dr. Amos Wilson, you'll find that there are a lot of parallels between Dr. Amos Wilson and the Honorable Marcus Garvey. And one of those parallels, I'm gonna speak to you all about that today, is really they both talked about the power of our consciousness. And so, Marcus Garvey said there's no height to which you cannot climb without the active intelligence of your own mind. Mind creates it as much as we desire in nature. He said we can have through the creation of our minds. And so Dr. Amos Wilson was an African-centered psychologist. And so he always talked about the power of our mind, the power of our consciousness, and the importance of controlling the institutions and the systems that mold and shape our consciousness. Okay, because Dr. Amos Wilson tells us that our consciousness creates our world. He said that the presence of human consciousness brings meaning into the world. And so the kind of world you experience, right, or you exist in, reflects the type of consciousness you possess. So then the question becomes, well, what kind of world do African people, could someone please mute? I don't know who that is. It's not me, but it's someone else. Could you please mute? Thank you so much. All right, so then the question becomes, well, what kind of world do African people exist in? And when you think about it, we live in a world where, although we have, and this is actually coming from some of Dr. Amos Wilson's work, although we possess the richest continent on the planet, they say that we're the most impoverished. And Dr. Amos Wilson said, well, we're impoverished because our consciousness is impoverished. Well, when you look around the world, you see that our people are laborers of other people, not themselves. Well, that's because our consciousness is that of a laborers. We have a servile or servant mentality. So again, Dr. Amos Wilson always talked about how our consciousness creates the world that we live in, or the world that we experience. And so he says that we are oppressed because we have not developed the power to prevent our oppression. Well, in order to do that, we would have to develop a consciousness, right, to seek power, because power is an instrument of social control and power. And those people, Dr. Amos Wilson always told us, those people who seek to control us and to maintain their social control and their power, they also seek to shape and direct, they also seek to shape and direct our consciousness. All right, and it says those people empower those people, our people empower those in power to control us when we surrender the creation and direction of our consciousness to them. And so Dr. Amos Wilson always talked about how if we want to control our consciousness, then we have to control the institutions and systems that condition our consciousness. And so those institutions would be our culture, our education, our media, and our family. In his book, The Developmental Psychology of the Black Child, he tells us that culture, the system culture, it defines our situations. So the way we interpret things, we interpret those things through our cultural lens. He tells us that our culture defines our attitudes, our values, our goals. It defines for us our myths, our legends, how we perceive the supernatural. It also provides our behavior patterns. Even within our family, he says that our family is a mini version of the culture to which it belongs. And our family interprets and teaches the customs, values, ideals, beliefs, and goals of its class and culture for its children. All right. our culture also dictates the media, right? And right now we see a lot of, that children are influenced by the media. And Dr. Amos Wilson talks about that in the developmental psychology of the Black child. And I'm sure if Baba was with us today, he would talk about social media right now, because social media has a very huge influence on our children today. So I'm pretty sure if Baba Sababu decided to update the developmental psychology of the Black child, he would probably include a section on social media. But Dr. Amos Wilson tells us in his book, The Developmental Psychology of the Black Child, that media also shapes our consciousness. The movies and televisions that our children watch influence them. The characters influence them, and that our children will live vicariously through the characters. In this book, he also tells us about the radio. And he says that a constant diet of music and messages the radio instills in the minds of his young listeners by their repetitive nature can also work against the best interest of the child. So it's very, very imperative that we control our media. It's very imperative that we control our media. It was Dr. Leonard Jeffries who says that whoever controls the image controls our self-esteem, our self-respect, and our self-development. And so that is why I decided Dr. Amos Wilson was a huge motivation behind my family and I creating the MELTREC program. The MELTREC program is currently being utilized in 10 countries and 30 states. And so MEL is short for melanin, TREC means journey. So we're taking our children on a journey to learn about the history, accomplishments, and cultures of African people. And so you're looking at 3 films that we have available, 3 animated films that we have available, as well as activity books and storybooks. And so this project, if you don't have it and you have young ones in your family, please get it. Again, Dr. Amos Wilson and Dr. Leonard Jeffries motivated us to create this project. So we can't keep feeding our children Disney and Nickelodeon and all of this other stuff that is really anti-African when you look at it. And so MELTREC has carried my family around the world. You're looking at us in Ghana. We went to 3 schools in Ghana and presented the MELTREC program. Just this February, we came back from Cameroon. So we went to Ghana in 2019, and a few months back, we went to Cameroon and we presented the MELTREC program. And I can tell you that children light up when they see themselves, not only when they see themselves, but when they see themselves depicted in a positive light. And we constantly, in the messages in MELTREC, we constantly tell our children, you come from greatness so you can be great. Your ancestors were great. And we tell them about the things that our ancestors gave to the world. You know, we gave science to the world, math to the world, morality to the world, architecture, religion, you name it, writing to the world. STEM came out of Africa. And so we teach our babies this with the MELTREC program, with the intent to change the self-perception of Black children, and to also, as Dr. Amos Wilson would say, increase the achievement motivation of our children. And so that is the purpose of the MELTREC program. I'm also in the process of building an African-centered STEM academy in Baltimore City. We're in the process of securing $3 million. So I'm crossing my fingers and praying that we get it. And so I'll know in December if we're going to get it, but we're shooting for 3 million. And we're going to establish an African-centered STEM academy. Why? Because Dr. Amos Wilson talked about education and how the function of education is to solve the problems the function of education is to solve the problems in particular to people and nation, and to secure the people and nation's biological survival. And so if you want African children to be educated, then they should be receiving education that solves the problems of African people. And so that is why now I'm in the process of establishing an African-centered STEM academy right here in Baltimore City. Dr. Amos Wilson also says, and I just want to kind of expound on that, he says the function of education is to maintain the biological survival of a people and to advance their interests, defend their interests, and enhance their quality of life. He tells us if your education does not function in those terms, then it is miseducation. And then he says, it doesn't matter how much knowledge you have accumulated or competent you are in terms of your skills. There are a lot of people running around here bragging about college degrees, bragging about having PhDs, bragging about having master's degrees, but don't know how to solve the problems of African people, don't know how to advance our interests, defend our interests, and enhance our quality of life. And so, you know, Dr. Amos Wilson has really motivated a lot of us to start our own schools. And he gave us a curriculum. He constantly promoted the curriculum that you can find in Peace Be Upon Kwame Nkrumah's, peace be upon him. I know he just became an ancestor maybe about a year or two ago, but Dr. Amos Wilson constantly talked about his curriculum. And in fact, Dr. Amos Wilson presented his curriculum and Blueprint for Black Power. And I said, where did Doc get this from? And come to find out, it's in Nation Building, Theory and Practice in African-Centered Education. And so we have a curriculum to start with. And so I give thanks for Dr. Amos Wilson presenting this curriculum. I give thanks for Baba Kwame Akoto for developing this curriculum. And so you have African-centered schools across the United States, and we need more, and we need more support. And so if there are African-centered schools in your community, family, please, please, please support those African-centered institutions. Send your children there if you can. Since the pandemic, because of the pandemic, a lot of African-centered schools have gone online. You have Nwalimu, Baba Nwalimu Baruti and Mama Ya Baruti and the Akabin Institute. They are an independent African-centered full-time and after-school homeschooling tutorial program for middle and high school students. These are my esteemed elders that I hold them in very high regard, but they are online. They have a curriculum. You have Brother Marcus Klein. That's another brother that I hold in high regards. He's in the Freedom Academy out there in Chicago, and he's online as well. And so now there's no excuse. Before, folks would say, oh, well, there's no African-centered schools in my community. Well, a lot of these African-centered schools, because of the pandemic, they're now offering the curriculum online. So it's time that we get our children involved or enrolled in African-centered institutions. You also have Baba Amin in the Uhuru Academy. He was first, I know he established this academy in Texas, but he's now based in South Carolina. And so we have to support our African-centered institutions. I'm over at Morgan State University. That's where I teach. That is my base. But I'm bringing African-centered teaching to STEM. You know, that I use an African-centered approach to teach engineering. And so these are my classes, a couple of classes that I've taught. I teach 4 core classes at the School of Engineering, namely electric circuits, signals and systems, circuits lab, and introduction to electrical engineering. But I teach it using an African-centered approach, and the students love it. I can honestly say they love it when they can see themselves. When you don't tell them that C squared equals A squared plus B squared is Pythagorean theorem, but this came from your African ancestors, and that these triplets were found in the Rhine's papyrus thousands of years ago before Pythagoras even existed. When you tell them about when you teach them about, oh my goodness, civilization of barbarism, and you teach them about Sheikh Anta-Job and how our ancestors were responsible for producing the oldest mathematical documentation. When you tell them that STEM came out of Africa, these students, I'm telling you, they light up when they hear this information. When you introduce concepts to them in engineering, like the Fourier transform, which talks about frequency, I tell them that, oh, in Africa, we had African fractals, and tell them about that, they light up. And so it's just very important that we get our babies, our children involved in African-centered education. And so in conclusion, family, I just want to say that, again, Dr. Amos Wilson, in my opinion, is one of the greatest minds of the 20th century. And what makes him the greatest mind, in my opinion, is that when you study his analyses of our problems, they were correct. His analysis was correct. You know, it was correct. It was thorough. It was critical. A lot of his proposed solutions are still what we need to liberate and advance our people. And so we have to continue to study, teach, and promote Dr. Amos Wilson's work. But more than just study, teach, and promote his work, we need to implement his proposed solutions. I always say to my audience, I said, if only we implemented the blueprint for Black power, we would literally change the trajectory of African people within one generation. And be it me believe this, I just want to say thank you so much for listening to my presentation. Thank you for having me. And let's keep on keeping on. And Kwame Nkrumah said, forward ever, backwards never. And so thank you so much, family, for listening to my presentation. Be blessed.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ma'at. One of the greatest signs of respect is when you come to your audience prepared. And I think every speaker today, including yourself, Dr. Ma'at, has come to us prepared. I don't think there's anybody that has sat through this forum so far can say they didn't come away something via email, and we had to send it to them via text. So I don't know if he's on. If you're on the Sababu, please come. So what I explained before you came here, Dr. Ma'at, we had some speakers, was that I had a couple of speakers who I think represent our future. I think Barry Cartman and yourself, a lot of elders on who actually did know Amos and work with them. So what I do right now is so funny. I didn't even finish the last we had in psychiatry, and I'll let you be the judge, okay? Hold on one second. What does that say? I don't know if you can see it. It says, let's start with solutions. All right, can anyone hear me? I may not. Okay. So Amos Wilson's solutions he got from Marcus Garvey. They were as follows: know yourself, self-love, unite yourself, think for yourself, speak for yourself, do for yourself, self-industry, self-commerce, self-defense, know your enemy, resist your enemy, defeat your enemy. So under know yourself, one of the first things, let's see who Amos Wilson was. The key things I want to present to you is that he was born in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. He went to a historically Black college, Morehouse College, and he started in 59 and he got his degree in 63. There's some other things that if I were doing another presentation, I'd go into, but those are the key things I want you to know from that. So Marcus Garvey said, the history of a movement, the history of a nation, the history of a race is the guidepost of that movement's destiny, that nation's destiny, and that race's destiny. That has to do with our first solution, which is self-knowledge. What Amos Wilson told us was that past, present, and future are one and the same. And that's his encouragement in the falsification of African consciousness for us to learn our history. Know yourself, still in this context, okay? So in terms of knowing ourselves, let me see some people to admit. You mentioned Rhine Papyrus, and I'm sure you could have also mentioned the Moscow Papyrus. I hate using those names because, as Dr. Ben taught us, it's usually named after the people or the places that stole them. However, when we're talking about mental health, Dr. Amos Wilson knew that we wrote about problems of mental health as early as 1550 BCE, before the Common Era. So without the first known written description of the meninges and cerebrospinal fluid and the convolutions of the brain come out of Africa. Something happened. Let's see if we can advance the slides. Okay. Still under the category of know yourself, which is in keeping with our discussion of solutions. We know that treatments of these disorders involved many things. Among them, there was the use of hallucinogens as therapeutic medications, voluntary retreat to temples, similar to the idea of an asylum nearly 3 millennia later, meaning 3,000 years later. As you remember, they were taking the mentally ill and putting them and chaining them until a guy named Pinel in France changed that. This is speaking to that. Psychotherapy came in the form of, advice, cause not fear among men. These are the sayings of Tahotep. It is another that attaineth by giving him unto him that hath not. All of these are like proverbs and advice on life. We also have Aesop's fables, and there are a lot of them. The Fox and the Grapes, there are a bunch of them, but they are very often taught some of the defense mechanisms and other things that are related to mental health. The next thing I said was love yourself. That picture up top is a young woman, young African woman with a African doll. This comes from Marcus Garvey's creating a doll factory in order for our children to have the things that don't alienate them from their ethnic and cultural roots. And so we have that. We have Dr. Amos Wilson saying the absence of African-American dolls, games, books, etc., may subtly help to alienate the child from its ethnic and cultural roots and identity. The child's room and home should reflect a love for Afrocentric culture filled with African images. Think for yourself. Now, you see, you can't see a thought. So we cover think for yourself and speak for yourself in the same instance, because you infer thoughts. We can't see your thoughts, but we can infer your thoughts, from your speech and your action. Dr. Amos Wilson approached Black on Black violence. You can just look at the title. It's not in the traditional way. People would be talking about Black and Black violence, and they talk about the unemployment, they talk about this. But what Amos Wilson spoke about was the psychodynamics of Black self-annihilation in service of white domination. When he started talking about Black children, he didn't talk about removing some sort of educational gap. He talked about awakening the natural genius of Black children. See, that's a man that's thinking for himself. And I'm going to stop the slide presentation. I think that that was a sign that I should save more time for the questions and answer period. We're going to move to our last speaker, who is the elder of elders. He not only knew Amos, he used to carry a blueprint for Black Power around with him everywhere he went, and would speak about what we should be doing and how we needed to be reading these books. So if Dr. Leonard Jeffries is here, I'm going to ask you to please come on and begin and finish your presentation, and then we will open it up to questions and answers at 5 o'clock on the dot. Yeah, 23 minutes instead of 20 like everybody else. Dr. Leonard Jeffries. Dr.
Okay,
Jeffries,
family.
are you here with us?
I certainly am. I have been here every minute, every strong minute, and every difficult minute. This certainly has been a great, unexpected afternoon treat. So I want to congratulate you and your team for putting it together the way you have. I think a lot of people from around the country can see the potential of the Dr. Mack way. He has control of what he's doing. He lays it out, he plans it, and then he has his support system. So I was glad to see our sister Betty Dotson right in the middle of everything, because they have been working together for many years. How many years, James, with you?
Well, we started working together at Harlem Hospital, I guess, in about 82. So you calculated, we're going on almost 40 years, I think that is, right?
So you done got old doing all of this work, but you're still doing it at a very high, important level. So I just want to congratulate all who have participated. It has been an extraordinary collection of African scholars, and the interpretations that they have laid out has been on the money. And the last presenter blew me out of my chair, Dr. Ma'at. And I even almost jumped through the screen when I saw that she was being honored with an honorary process led by Dr. Jean Deloche, a buddy who goes back with me to the 1950s at Lafayette College in Pennsylvania. And so to be able to make that type of linkage, Dr. Ma'at and her great work, and to have this brother who was a dynamic factor in helping to develop not only the Howard University engineering, but the formulation and the development of the Morgan State School. So it has been an enormously successful endeavor. We hope that this can continue simply because what you've done in terms of Dr. Amos Wilson, this extraordinary brother up from Mississippi, but we need to also make sure that Dr. John Henry Clark has the same type of process at the right time. Dr. Ben has the same type of process at the right time. Those of us who have experienced the growth with these brothers and sisters, we should make sure that it's not just a fundraiser for the conscious radio station, but it's the fundraiser for what we need to have in place are think tanks for African peoples. Think tanks. That's what Amos Wilson was, a one-man think tank. He, coming up from Mississippi, he survived the destruction of miseducation in Ole Miss. He survived the elite education out of Morehouse. And then he came on to New York City, Big Apple, and he survived the Jesuit education coming out of either St. John's or Fordham. So the brother was able to survive those processes and make his great contribution, which is we have to be prepared to organize think tanks at every level. Think tanks for the children before they are born in the womb of the mothers. Think tanks as they are young children walking and beginning to be a part of the human family. Think tanks as they go through the regular school processes that needs to be complemented by Africanists. Think tanks when they get into high positions of power, when they really need to have the support of the Africanists, because when you get into high positions of power, that's when they put the greatest pressure on you to submit. And so clearly the brothers and sisters for today are not prepared to submit. I mean, it is very strong to see all of you and to see this strong contingent coming out of New York with our brother, leader of the UNIA in New York, and working with our great brother, trying to develop the whole international formula of the UNIA. And so Michael Duncan has a partner, Raymond Duguay. And of course, Raymond is strong because he's got a wife who's a professional, a medical professional. And so Raymond was one of our students, so we claim him. He was one of our students at City College. We claim him. Our sisters and whatnot, we claim him. We claim Hank, who was a part of the process in New York. And of course, Dr. Mack comes straight out of New York, and he was an enormous factor. And he has in his mindset the experiences of our Queen Mothers. So many of them are a part of our development. Queen Mother Adelaide Safford, this is what she was trying to tell us, you've got to do. And then I saw my daughter waving her head, Karen, Karen, Hank, and the others are part of the Jeffries Foundation, which was established in order to sustain what we're doing. And then, of course, Amos left us too soon, but he left us with a think tank process. And the person who carried it on his back from his apartment 2 or 3 stories up on Empire, the brother who carried it and produced what Amos couldn't do because his life experience had left us, Brother Sababu. Sababu took that process of Amos and brought it to life even after he had left us, took notes and tapes of Amos in his private moments, and he put them together in the books that came. Amos has been gone for 10, 15, 25 years, and his work is still being produced. So we have to understand this process as being life-giving for African people. They're not doing it in Ghana. They're not doing it in Senegal. They're not doing it in Haiti and Jamaica. The process that Sababu and others have put together to sustain this knowledge and pass it on needs to be packaged so that they are doing it in the Caribbean, not in terms of each individual island, but a collective of islands, that they are doing it in Brazil, the largest Black presence on the planet in terms of a nation. They need to do it everywhere in Europe that they can. And of course, we've been trying to do it in terms of the African-American and the African-Caribbean experience. So that I just want to say, hey, this is what it's all about. In fact, I used to tell my students, when you go through New York subway and you got a problem with these men looking at all you beautiful women, make sure that you have your protection. A little bit of mace might help you out. But this volume, when you're reading it on the subway and somebody is looking at you like he shouldn't be looking, you can quietly close the book. And when he puts his hand where he should not put his hand, strike a blow for African female liberation and knock the sucker out. So that we are involved in a process of enormous school building, institution building, think tank building, and we have to give thanks to our females. That's why I'm so glad that Dr. Ma'at and others. Now, I can't do nothing and couldn't do nothing for the last 56 years if I didn't have a Queen Mother, Rosalind Jeffries, by my side. I was trying to get her to hang with you all today, but she had just come from some of her own business. But Rosalind and I have been in this mode of think tanking for Black people around the world for the last 56 years. She first went to Africa in 1960. I had went to Africa in 1959, not on the continent. I met Africa in Europe. That's when I met Dr. Shekata Diop and the other scholars. And coming back from Africa, that's when I had a chance to connect with the other parts of the family, like our brother, who's with us now in this photo, and that's Dr. Asa Hayes. You talk about schools of knowledge. Asa was a school of knowledge, study him. Amos was a school of knowledge, study him. Frances Cress Welsing, a school of knowledge, study her. And then the Queen Mother of Queen Mothers was Regent Adelaide Sanford, 95 years old and still stomping ground to make African people wake up and take control of their minds, body, and spirit. So we're on a victorious path. It's difficult. It ain't gonna be easy. But when the sister, Dr. Ma'at, was talking about Morgan State, I've been talking about it for the last couple of years because I want to link up with Morgan State. We're working on that now. My wife and I have collections that are unbelievable all over this house, in the 10 spaces in this house, 10 rooms, including the attic. The material is being prepared so that it can be offered to one of our great Black schools, and we're thinking in terms of Morgan State University. So CEMOTAP produced a community forum of getting this material out to our brothers and sisters. And so the community forum became one of those vehicles we use. And the person who symbolized it was Bill Jones and his wife, Sister Mother Kefa. And we just obtained last week, with the help of Charles and others, we obtained the library of the First World Alliance. It was given in a will by Mother Kefa to me to sustain it. So that library will help us whatever we do in Morgan State. That library will help us whatever we do at Howard. That library will help us in Atlanta University. Dr. Clark's 20,000 books we had to fight to get them down to Atlanta University and the Woodruff Center. And so that's where it is. ASA has contributed thousands of books to be a part of the Dr. Clark collection. Others have contributed books. We intend to contribute thousands of books to be a part of that center in Atlanta. Why? Because Jeffries has roots in Georgia. We can't talk Georgia without talking Jeffries' African roots, and that has to deal with great African families such as the Broners and a whole host of others that are a part of our family. So that we have to see what our people have done and replicate it and pass it on. There should be a book on his own consciousness. Our brother Savavo should be sitting down with some of us, taking, why did you do what you did when you did it? How come you spent your life saving this brother's message when he is gone? And then the beautiful thing of it all is that last time I saw Savavo, he had sacks on his back. And that was the latest work of Amos Wilson. I mean, still carrying it on. My great difficulty is that I was not able to bring him into what we built at City College and the City University, simply because he was already in the hostas faculty process. And you can't move horizontally to positions. I would have given him an honorary position at City College. I would have given him a distinguished professorship at City College if we could do it. But you cannot move horizontally in the City University system. But he still kept, even when he lost the position at Hostas, he still kept contributing. And so when you have people like Dr. Shekanta Diop and Dr. John Henry Clark, these are the brothers whose work and their life story and their work has to be appreciated. And so certainly CEMOTAP and others have done what they could do, but we need to plan an international global think tank process so this knowledge can fall right into place with these other great activities. Frances Cress Welsing, she's not by herself. She had a sisterhood around her. She had a big brother who helped her. And Dr. Frances Cress Welsing produced, before this, she produced the ISIS papers. But the extended think tank family that she had around her, they expanded the ISIS papers tradition that she laid out, and they came together to produce the Osiris papers to complement her ISIS papers. These are the things that our brothers and sisters are doing. This is why victory is at hand if we can stay the course. And of course, Dr. John Henry Clark, I had to give thanks to him because he was our great mentor. His work of a significance is African World Revolutions, Africans at the Crossroads. This was one of the original, yes, brother, hold her up, because she was a dynamo. It'd be hard to understand. And she had sisters like Dr. Pat Newton, Segmet, who was working with her in their great work. But Dr. John Henry Clark was inspired by one of our greatest minds, and that's Dr. Shekanta Diop, okay? And this book that I have in my hand of Shekanta Diop is the original book that I took to Europe to try to translate this French book into English. And we were able to do it with the help of others, including a brother from the Congo, Brother Ayeme. And so it is family together forever, which is the key. And don't let anybody block us from our mission. Hank and Karen and others are part of the Jeffries Foundation. We are revising it, we are expanding it, we're trying to get it prepared for the world. And so you'll be hearing about us. And of course, Raymond DeGay and his partners, like Mike Duncan, will be looking for their support and contribution. Simply because when you leave this house and walk 4 blocks up the street, you walk to a street called Hamilton, and you make a left turn there and you go to the house of Marcus Garvey, the home of Marcus Garvey, not the elder, but Marcus Garvey Jr. lived 4 blocks from us. And when my wife and I wanted a change of pace from all of the stress, we would go walk up to the house up in Hamilton, past Intervale Park and get to Hamilton, make the turn to the left, go up on the porch and ring the bell. And then Jean would come to the door and she'd look out and she'd start yelling and screaming to Marcus Jr., the Jeffries are here, the Jeffries are here. And of course, we would be together for the next 3 or 4 hours of planning and structuring what we were going to do to help each other. And then we would walk back home. Now that was our walk. That was happening in this. And so to see Raymond and others honor with the celebrations, the funeral celebrations, it really was magnificent to see, even though Marcus Jr. has left us, that he's being properly sent to glory with proper traditions and whatnot. So brothers and sisters, we got a work to do and we cannot not do it. One other important work that I wanted to let people know about, because it's the same process, and Charles was smart to move it out of the way. First word, Black scholars, thinkers, warriors, wisdom, knowledge, and mental liberation. And this was done by a brother from the West Coast who had part of my name. And his name is Kwaku Person Lin. My African stool name is Nana Kwaku Jua Ajuman II of the Agogo stool in Asante. But this brother was smitten and bitten by the African bug. And so he produced, he produced Mental Liberation, which was a 30-day Black History Month presentation of our history. And it was so powerful that they knocked it off the airways. He said, that's not going to stop me. So he came up with a publication. He interviewed all of us. And all of us is this great group of folks operating as family. And that all included knowledge, wisdom, mental liberation, Black scholars, thinkers, and warriors. It included, as we win this enormous race, the first team out of runners is Dr. Clark, Dr. Van Sertima, Dr. Ben, Dr. Francis Cress Welding, and Dr. Willard Dillard. And then the baton is passed on to others, and that includes Dr. Asa Hilliard III, Dr. Robert Hill, Dr. Deborah Ma'at, and then it's passed on to another team of runners, Naeem Akbar. And of course, every time you see Naeem, you got to think Dr. Wade Nobles, Louis Farrakhan, Barbara Sizemore, Dr. Sizemore, educator extraordinaire, and one of those who was with us when we were beginning to move through the world and put that African question on the table. And then
Dr. J,
yes,
I'm going to have to take care of a little business. If you could wrap it up, I appreciate
yes,
it.
well, I'm trying to wrap it up in
Yes, sir. In 1 minute.
Right. Well, it would be the last team that they passed the baton on in this great work includes Kwame Ture and Dr. Len Jeffries. So we're about family. We're about institution building. We're about changing our world. And we have to thank those of you who pulled this fantastic program together. Let's agree to expand it. Let's do it more often. Let's talk about a think tank that moves around the African world. We could have it in England. We could have it in Brazil. We could have it in any of the great centers in the United States. So thank you, brothers and sisters. Thank you, Dr. Mack. And Sister Betty, keep that whip on him when he gets out of line. Just snap it, boom, and say, he knows what he should do. So this has been a marvelous process, and it's a continuation of a victorious march. As we have always said, we're on a victorious march, and we can't stop now. We just have to pass the baton on. Thank you much. Madase P. Many thanks.
Dr. J, I was chided for being rude, and I'm going to chide you now. Why would you tell her to get another whip?
Well, sometimes
I don't need 2 whips.
She doesn't. Yes, you got your wife, and you got Betty, and then you got your mother's spirit. You got and Regent Sanford. She's one of your mothers in the struggle. So yes.
Oh, boy.
I'm gonna
Make it
follow your
rough. Dr. J,
instructions.
thank you so much. Listen, brothers and sisters, give a black hand to Dr. J. And I got to get back to the business before we do our question and answer period. So now we're going to have a question and answer period. I don't think you've seen one like the one we do. We go through every single person to allow our people a chance to talk. And that's why we needed a whole hour to do it.
No problem. Ms. Hunter, go right ahead.
Oh, thank you, sir. So the question is in line with the last piece that was shared by Dr. J, which is the call for a think tank. And so my question is, how exactly do we do that? What are the strategies? That's something we need to put into action. And so what does that look like? And can we walk away from the space today with some kind of draft?
Oh, well, before I answer that.
I can hear now.
Oh, Dr. McIntosh, are you back on?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. I'm back on. But go ahead. Finish what you were saying.
No, the question was on think tank. Ms. Hunter followed up with what Dr. Jeffries suggested, that we establish a think tank. She'd like to know, how do we go about doing that? And before the end of this program, can we get something definitive? So Dr. McIntosh, I cede authority to you. Go right ahead.
Okay. Today, we're going to work on a much smaller project. I find that when we do something, anyone else with a question about Amos Wilson? Okay, go ahead, speak. Who are you, brother? Say your name.
I'm Ronald Johnson.
Yes, my brother, go ahead.
Johnson.
Yes, brother Ronald Johnson, please ask your question.
My question is, I just want to know what inspired Brother Sababu to edit the new book that he published.
Hey, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And great
So
afternoon.
this changes, Brother Sababu. We're going to stop. You can present. We want to do question and answers, but you can take obviously longer because somehow I missed you before. Thank you.
Yeah, something came up here on my screen, so I'm just trying to get rid of it right here. 1 second.
Okay.
Okay, let's see if I can get this off of here. Yes. I've been with you all afternoon. One of the things, what inspired the latest work, the psychology of self-hatred and self-defeat, it was part of a project that we had done in 1987 when Dr. Wilson pulled together that forum at the office. Pardon the background noise. I live on a relatively noisy street. The psychology of self-hatred, it was made up of 20 hours of Dr. Wilson, and I felt that this piece was the glue between the other works. It was the work coming after the developmental psychology of the Black child, and it was the glue that put all the other works together. So in short, we, along with Brother Adisa Makalani and Brother Joseph Gillians, who is also on the chat, and so many others, we, over a period of years, transcribed the material, and we were able, after 30 years, to get it for publication. Simply, it was a labor of love, and I felt that this work was that linchpin that helped all the other books really work extraordinarily well.
Brother Sababu, thank you for that answer. As I told you, if there's anything else that you would like to say, please use the time to say it, because you didn't present today, and we thought you might want to say something about Amos.
I first came to know Dr. Wilson in 1980 when he presented at one of our forums in Brooklyn. And then, of course, we had him speak at the First World Alliance in 1980 also on the developmental psychology of the Black child. We all started a close association doing things. And of course, as presented by so many of the previous speakers, the eloquence of Wilson was there from the start. And he would present over a very, very long period of time at forums, even for yourself and Alton Maddox and the others. And for me, I felt that something essential was missing around AMOS, which was to arm the publisher's work and to get as much out of his discipline and his brilliance as we possibly could. Of course, we later formed African World Info Systems, and over a period of 6 years, we were able to do a fantastic amount of work. Working with AMOS is always a pleasure, brilliant mind, humble, and also he gave you the necessary room to grow. The AMOS, in a sense, is beyond words, but I came today actually to see what progress we had had over the last 30 years from those who were part of the Wilsonian school of thought. And I was quite impressed. Listening to Elder Jeffries and Dr. Ma'at, and I saw so many of my friends and others in the chat, I felt a sense of gratification that we had come full circle, that from those early years of 1980 till the present, we had seen his works grow, blossom, and be available for a worldwide audience. Those, some of you may have seen a discussion with Dr. Ma'at and myself on her channel. And I think they would hear, in a sense, enough from me then. In a nutshell, we have been able to do and maintain in print, most importantly, maybe about 8 to 10 books. And we are in the process of reissuing Awakening the Natural Genius of Black Children in a time when our children and our people are under the George Floyd, the Corona, and a Trump dissident or demented presidency that has put us to the sword in many cases. So we hope to have that update available to you in the near future. AMOS was a scholar's scholar, and for those of you who have visited my home, you would see the preponderance of books and other materials and the methodology of an Amos Wilson that produced an Amos Wilson. On the desk, I have so many of his notebooks still here. Much work still to be done, and we will continue to bring forth some of the eminence of Dr. Wilson. I think that's enough from me, and I will close on that. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Brother Sababu.
Mm-hmm.
I see a few people with their hands raised. Let's start with Lo Harry, Loeharry. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, greetings, everybody. My name is
Greetings.
My name is Michael Joseph Harry, and I am joining you from southern Nigeria, a country in West Africa. Um, First of all, I would like to express my utmost appreciation to the scholarly presentations from all the speakers. And of course, the elderly people I am seeing here, I should consider myself to be the youngest of all the people I'm seeing here if I were to judge from age. And so I am particularly thankful that I am here to learn from the oases of wisdom and a kind of understanding that is very, very hidden from a lot of people on the continent of Africa. Now, I would like to ask two questions. The first one would go this way. I myself and a few brothers from the motherland here have been members of the UNIASCL Baca Clark Baltimore Division under the leadership of Brother Caesar Kijana and alongside Brother Winchester, who is the secretary, and he also doubled as the treasurer. It's been my wish, and not just only my wish alone, but it's been a collective desire to want to have a UNIA division in Africa and in Nigeria. That's because it for many years right now we do not have one single functional UNIA division, and that has for many years denied us of knowing more about Marcus Garvey and Garveyism, and those are actually these are intellectual movements that are very, very essential for the liberation of Africa, because Nigeria boasts a population of 200 million plus. And to that extent, whatever happens to Nigeria is very, very important. It's a measure of what is going to happen in other neighboring countries that are equally in Africa.
Yes,
Because
brother, you've
Nigeria
made
is so-
brother, you've made your point very well. Let's let him answer the question. Brother Raymond, I think that question is addressed to you.
Yes, but sorry, please. So the question now straight is this. The question is this, please.
We have 120 people, my brother. We have 130 people, 121 people now. We need to share the time.
Okay, how do we get a division in Nigeria? That is a question.
Go ahead.
I did receive your email and I responded. So we have already started the process, so I will be speaking with you. Are you aware? Did you read your email? I did receive it and I did respond.
No, I haven't seen the response from you yet.
Please check. I can even tell you when I sent it.
Okay, sir. Thank you. I would like to find out.
Okay. Thank you, brother. All right, brother Afam. Afamafuna.
Yes, Afamafuna. Yes, I have a question for Brother Sababu about Amos. How you doing, brother? It's good to see you. Quick question. As I'm a psychologist for everyone in the room, I'm a leadership psychology specialist myself, and so when I was first introduced to Amos and his writings, they hit me like a ton of bricks from a leadership standpoint. And what I noticed in some of his writings and speech were maybe kernels of presentation that sounded like Eastern philosophy, like Zen or Taoism, people like Alan Watts and stuff like that. So my question is, was Amos influenced? I mean, even though the African stuff preceded the Chinese stuff, was Amos ever influenced by any Zen writings, any Taoist writings? Because I could have swore I even heard some quotes in some of his lectures that hearken to those Eastern philosophies. So I was just curious if he had any of that in his repertoire.
Absolutely. Amos is the most widely read person that I've known. So if you go to Amos's personal library, you would see almost everything, every stripe. And and his range of presentations would of course encompass these avenues of thought and processes, no question.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I thought. Thank you.
Okay.
Also, his books were well, they were annotated. So a lot of times you'll find the references to some of the things that I was wondering, did you look for the references, brother? And
You know what?
you didn't see any?
But funny thing is, I get so enthralled sometimes with the material, I forget to look at the annotations. But no, that totally makes sense. Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Yes.
Brother Fitzgerald, Bontemps.
Yes. Can anybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Ask your question.
Great. This question is for Assistant President General, Brother Raymond Duguay. So my question is, how can Amos Wilson's philosophy be used in the Haitian community? The reason why,
Brother Raymond, you heard the question. How can Amos Wilson's philosophy be heard in the Haitian community?
It's a universal African liberation philosophy. It's everywhere. How can it be? When you read Amos Wilson, it's like reading Garvey. When you follow Dr. Wilson, it's like listening to bookmarks. It's like listening to Mackendal. It's like listening to Dessalines. So the question is, I think it's misdirected. The question is, how do we raise up and rebuild IET in our image of true Africanness? And yes, it is through race first. This is what Dr. Wilson embraced. This is certainly the only philosophy that can work. And you see what's going on in IET. The end game is going to be occupation. All of this nonsense, but we Africans, whether we're from IET, Jamaica, United States, or the continent, we have an obligation to pool our resources, come together, and practice race first. The answer to that question, Brother Fitzgerald, is how to liberate Black people. And this is how we're doing it. We fully embrace Mr. Garvey and Dr. Wilson. Thank you.
All right. Clarence Matthews, anyone?
Yes, I have a question.
Go ahead, Mary Miller.
There are two quick questions. One, my favorite books from Dr. Wilson are Developmental Psychology of the Black Child and Awakening the Natural Genius of Black Children. And for years, I've given them as gifts to women who are pregnant or planning to get pregnant. And one is that I haven't found it in print lately. And two, when I read it the last time, some of the information was a little bit dated, even though the core message was still there. So I was wondering if anybody would be able to step forward and update those books for the 21st century using the Dr. Amos's work template. And then the other quick question is, I think Dr. Wright was talking about agricultural culture of African people. So I was wondering how does she reconcile how even today in Africa, it's the men, the husbands who own the land, or the fathers, and then the inheritance of the land goes to the sons and not the daughters. Meanwhile, it's the women who run the agricultural economy, the women who are the ones who work the land, raise the crops, go to the market and sell the crops. So how can you reconcile the inability of girls to inherit land from their fathers, or even wives having a stake in land ownership that they are working?
That was Dr. Wright. Dr. Tyrene Wright, are you still on with us? Dr. Tyrene Wright, are you still with us? I'm looking through. I think she has left, sister. So your first question was something else. The question about agriculture
was updating the
right.
Yeah, the first question was about updating the awakening the natural genius of Black children and the developmental psychology of the Black child.
Okay, Brother Sababu.
Are you hearing me clearly still?
Yes, sir.
Yes, okay. Of course, these books are over 30 years old. The developmental psychology is over 40 years old. So I still await a very brave young psychologist who is willing to take that mantle that AMOS established in the developmental psychology, bring the data to the fore, and we can improve upon it. Uh, just to let you know that in the 1990s, AMOS had wanted to do a second edition of the developmental psychology of the Black child. And he had met with some prominent child psychologists and others to accomplish that end. However, we moved to do a 10-part lecture series, which turned into Blueprint for Black Power. And near completion of that project is when Dr. Wilson suffered a stroke and passed on. So yes, we are willing and ready for the new African psychologists to come on board with the latest information, and maybe we can engage and make it for the 21st century.
All right, thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I
Any
got
other
one, Dr.
questions from
McIntyre.
members of the audience? Yes, yes,
I
sir.
have one.
Brother Kwabena. Yes, peace and blessings.
Peace and blessings, everyone. You know, that is so important that we hopefully get that updated, especially dealing with the latest Black on Black violence book that came out. Just recently picked that up. I'm still in the process of reading it, but it's so important. I work with the Clear the Airways Project, and our focus is on the fact that they push all this violent, pornographic, self-hating music on our children. All of us here, I mean, a lot of us here, the adults here, but our main thing is that you can't be doing that to our children. And so in the Chicago area, you know, this whole violence piece is really, we're like the poster child for violence in the US right now, for the country. Where we had 130 plus people shot first 5 days of July. You guys may have saw Wednesday, there were 3, what they call now mass shootings with 5, and then 8 people were shot. And then we just monitored the radio the next day. And just real quick, a couple songs that we're playing. I got this Glock in my hand. I'm aiming at your forehead. I spin your block, come back, it looks like the world ends. By the way, that's the #1 song in the country recently. I put 20K on your head and have your partners come kill you. I burn me an end at the store where your mammy and grandmama shop at. Not your mama, but where your mammy and grandmama shop at. I ain't got nowhere to go. I done shot up everywhere they was. Okay, and that last song, that was also #1 during Memorial Day weekend, according to the station in New York, the Hot 97 or whatever the Breakfast Club comes out of. He says, I ain't got nowhere to go. I done shot up everywhere they was. That's in the chorus. So they repeat that over and over again. Now, as our children are being programmed, because our children are the ones who are listening to this crap, we understand that once we get this crap off, that's what we're working on, that we're gonna need psychologists and to deprogram our children away from this self-hate and violence. And just wanted to some of your thoughts on that, and also getting back control. The sister mentioned controlling our media. We have to get back control of our media, we know. But in the meantime, until we do, we also have to demand that they stop this. They don't do this, and Dr. McIntosh has written about this. If you replace that N-bomb that they drop in 90% of these songs with K-I-K-E or J-E-W or F-A-G, it would not be tolerated. And so we as African people, we have to stop tolerating that. But then again, we got to be ready to deprogram our children and our youth once we get that crap off, and we got to get it off.
Thank you, Brother Kwabena. Did you also have a question, Brother Kwabena, or just a statement?
Just that preparation for, you know, mass deprogramming, because in mass, our youth are being programmed to hate
Correct.
themselves and to kill each other right now in the most blatant methods and blatant terms right now.
Okay, I think we got it. Okay, thank you. Now listen, Film Black Q Loyalty has a question. Please ask your question.
Yes, hello. I have a question. Yes, first of all, I'd just like to say that it's actually an honor to be on the line with so many great people. And my question is, I do know that Dr. Amos Wilson spoke about the enhancement of the Black Child Genius. And I also run a program myself called Kids Teaching Kids. So I was just curious, about his vision and his goal so I can take in a little bit of information to expand on my business. Yes.
Brother Sababu? Thank you, sister.
Yes, I think I missed just the last part of her statement. There was a motorbike that was just making a whole bunch of noise.
Loyalty, can you ask that question, the last part of that question again?
Yes, of course. So I was just saying, I know that Dr. Amos Wilson spoke about the enhancement of the Black Genius Child, and I just wanted to, I was a little curious about his goal and his vision, because I also run a program myself called Kids Teaching Kids. Yes.
Yes. In a sense, Dr. Wilson, as the premier psychologist at that time, established the field of Black developmental psychology, different from the standard white psychology. And of course, he delineated the developmental ratios of Black children and the head start that our children had. But he also dealt with the fact that by age 5, it seemed to be in reverse because of the substandard education and the socioeconomic situations and political situation that we find ourselves in. But what he established is that this child was brilliant beyond par. And with what you are proposing to do, we hope that with the approaches by so many of our writers and scholars and teachers, and you would see it in his example in Awakening the Natural Genius, when he mentioned the Marcus Garvey School, and the fact that in our schools, under our tutelage and academic program, we were able to far surpass the quote unquote standard education. So I think in a nutshell, we hope to produce another text in the future. Amos had talked about doing a piece called Educating the Black Child for the 21st Century. It's on the screen right now. It is about 30 years old, and we are hoping at some point that we can have that delivered to you. And with that, we can actually, with a few more chapters, propel this Black child into the 21st and 22nd centuries. So with a bit of luck and with a little help from Brother Disa and Brother Joe and the others, I think we can pull it off.
Dennis from Detroit, what's your question?
Yeah, my name is Imhotep.
Yes,
my question, can you hear me?
Yes, Brother Imhotep.
Okay, my question to you, either you, Dr. McIntosh, or Dr. J. My question is, did Dr. John Henry Clark have any influence on the perspectives of Dr. Amos Wilson? And my second question is, what relationship did Dr. Clark and Dr. Amos Wilson have?
Dr. J, you want me to start and you want to finish, or you want to start and I'll finish it?
No, you can start it, Dr.
Okay, so listen, Dr. J and Dr. Clark were both lecturers at the First World Alliance. And Dr. Clark influenced anybody who was involved with African thought at the time or African history. There's so many things that he brought to us that people just repeat without even knowing the source of it. I had Dr. Clark for 16 credits in college. He was my mentor. My youngest son is named after him. Now, there was a sort of a falling out that Amos had with First World Alliance. It wasn't a hostile falling out. It was just when two people have different ideas as to the direction they want to go. For Amos, what he looked at when he saw big trips to Egypt and people putting hundreds of dollars together, Amos was always interested in more commerce and more industry and those sorts of things. So he talked to me personally and told me what his problem was with First World. He saw a lot of money go through it. He saw a lot of people attend, and he didn't see the type of organizing for liberation, organizing for independence, organizing for self-reliance that should take place. In other words, it was almost like a, I'm only speaking like from Amos's point of view. It's almost like a continuance of some feel-good thing, like a church or something. You get together, but where are your institutions? What, and I'm sure that there were people that Dr. Jeffries was more involved than I was in it. I only lectured once at First World, but what I would say is that was the difference that I knew of that he had, not with Professor Clark specifically, but with the group, which consisted of Dr. Clark, Dr. Ben, and a bunch of other people. Brother Sababu, did I get it wrong? I see your face there, so you can you can clarify more if you want to.
Yes. Yeah. It's unfortunate that that perspective is out there. Amos did a presentation, and it's in the lecture in the falsification of African consciousness. It's the second lecture on European political dogmatism. It was done at Harlem Hospital. And of course, as everyone would know, Dr. Ben lives right there across the street on the Lenox Terrace. Now, Amos was making the point to us, those attendees and many of us who had gone to the Nile Valley. He was explicit. He said that after you make the trip to the continent, this Harlem community is still for the taking. At the time, you could have gotten a building sometimes for $1. And Amos was saying, be sure to have an economic agenda. Remember, Amos had a business place right on 125th Street on both sides of the Apollo, once on the second floor, and then he moved to the other side. He saw the taking over of our community, or the continued occupation of our community by other people. The roads on 125th